Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was a hybrid Shinigami and fell in love with Rangiku Matsumoto? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Scent of Ash and Orange Blossoms. The air in the Hokage's office was thick with the familiar scents of old paper and ink, a comforting aroma that had permeated the tower for generations. It was a smell Naruto Uzumaki had come to associate with a specific kind of exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness that came not from a battlefield, but from the endless war of attrition waged against stacks of mission scrolls and budget reports. He stood before the Hokage's desk, arms crossed, a Jonin commander's flak jacket worn over his signature black and orange attire. The jacket was still new enough to feel stiff against his shoulders. A constant reminder of the responsibilities that had settled upon him like a second skin in the 2 years since Pain's assault. The village was rebuilt, stronger than ever, its spirit a defiant testament to its will. But peace was a delicate thing, maintained by vigilance and an ungodly amount of paperwork. Another border dispute with the stone? Naruto asked, his voice al rumble that had lost its youthful shrillness. He shifted his weight, the floorboards groaning in protest. I thought Onoki was behaving himself after the last summit. Tsunade, the Godime Hokage, didn't look up from the document she was scrutinizing. Lines of fatigue were etched around her eyes, but her presence was as formidable as ever. A half-empty bottle of sake sat near her elbow, a silent companion in her late-night vigil. He is, she grunted, finally setting the scroll down with a decisive thud. This is different. Patrols near the old Uzumaki ruins on the coast have reported strange energy signatures. Nothing hostile, just odd fluctuations that don't match any known chakra type. She finally lifted her gaze, her brown eyes sharp and analytical. Kakashi's preliminary report suggests it's atmospheric. Some kind of natural phenomenon. Naruto's brow furrowed. But you don't think so? It wasn't a question. I think Kakashi is being cautious, she corrected. He also noted that the wildlife in the area is agitated. Birds are migrating out of season. The air feels heavy, charged. It reminds me of the stillness before a great storm. She leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking. I want you to take a team. Go and see for yourself. Don't engage anything unless you have to, but I want a definitive answer. My gut is telling me this isn't natural. Naruto nodded, his expression serious. His own senses, honed by sage mode and sharpened by the Kyuubi's presence within him, had been on edge for days. A faint, almost imperceptible hum resonated at the edge of his perception. A background static that he couldn't quite place. It wasn't chakra, it was something else, something older and colder. Who do you want me to take? Shikamaru for strategy, Sai for reconnaissance. I want this done quietly. We don't need to spark a panic over a ghost story. Understood. He turned to leave, but Tsunade's voice stopped him at the door. Naruto. He glanced back. Her expression had softened, the hard lines of the Hokage replaced by the weary concern of the woman who saw him as something akin to a son. Be careful. The world is finally quiet. I'd like to keep it that way. A faint smile touched his lips. Don't worry, Ba-chan. I'm always careful. Her retort was immediate and sharp. Like hell you are. Now get out of my office. He chuckled, the sound echoing in the hallway as he departed. The easy banter was a familiar comfort, an anchor to the life he had fought so hard to build. Yet, as he moved through the bustling corridors of the tower, the low hum at the edge of his senses seemed to grow a fraction louder, a dissonant note in the symphony of the village. The unease followed him as he gathered his team. Shikamaru Nara, ever the pragmatist, was Alred. Why mapping potential routes and calculating supply needs before Naruto had even finished explaining the mission? His perpetual slouch and bored expression belied a mind that moved at the speed of light. Sai, by contrast, was a mask of placid neutrality, his sketchbook already in hand, ready to give form to whatever anomalies they might find. They were a well-oiled machine, a testament to Konoha's new generation of leadership. They moved quickly, leaving the familiar warmth of the village behind for the dense forests of the Land of Fire. The journey to the coast was a 2-day trek at their pace. A blur of green canopy and sun-dappled earth. Naruto ran at the head of the formation, his senses cast out like a net. The hum grew stronger with every league they covered, a vibration that seemed to settle deep in his bones. It was a pressure, a weight in the air that made his skin prickle. "You feel it too, don't you?" Shikamaru's voice was low, cutting through the sound of their rushing footsteps. Naruto glanced back. "It's getting stronger. Whatever this is, we're heading right for it." Sai, gliding alongside them on one of his ink birds, added his observation in his typical deadpan. "The chakra in the atmosphere is thin here. It feels suppressed, as if something is pushing it away." That was it. That was the word Naruto had been searching for. The energy wasn't just present, it was oppressive. It was a dominant force that bent the very environment around it. As they broke through the tree line and the salty scent of the sea hit them, the feeling intensified tenfold. Before them lay a stretch of rugged coastline, dominated by the crumbling gray stone of what were once Uzumaki watchtowers. The sky overhead was a strange, bruised purple, though the sun was still high. The air was unnaturally still and cold. No gulls cried overhead. The only sound was the crash of waves against jagged rocks. "This is it," Naruto said, his voice tight. He closed his eyes, drawing on the natural energy around him. Sage mode ignited in an instant. The orange pigmentation flared around his eyes, his pupils shifting to the horizontal bars of a toad. The world snapped into focus with breathtaking clarity. He could feel the life force of every blade of grass, the slow, ancient pulse of the stones beneath his feet. And he could feel the source of the disturbance. It was a void, a tear in the fabric of the world, shimmering like heat haze over the largest of the ruined towers. It was a gaping wound, and from it bled that cold, immense pressure. "What do you see?" Shikamaru asked, his hand already forming a seal. Shadows stretching from his feet. "Trouble," Naruto stated grimly. "It's a hole in the world. And something is coming through." As if summoned by his words, the shimmering distortion convulsed. It tore open with a sound like ripping canvas, a scream of shearing reality that scraped at their eardrums. A figure emerged from the blackness within, dropping to the stone courtyard below with a heavy, solid impact that cracked the ancient flagstones. It was a monstrosity, vaguely humanoid in shape. It was massive, easily 12 feet tall, with skin the color of bleached bone. Its body was a grotesque fusion of muscle and jagged white armor. A gaping, black hole was punched clean through its sternum, and its face was covered by a shard of a bone-white mask, shaped like the jaw of some predatory beast. Its eyes, visible through the mask, glowed with a malevolent, hungry yellow light. It radiated an aura of pure, predatory emptiness that made the Kyuubi stir restlessly in Naruto's gut. A low growl of primal animosity echoing in his mind. "What in the hells is that thing?" Shikamaru breathed, his usual composure fractured by the sheer wrongness of the creature. "I don't know," Naruto replied, his body already coiled with tension. "But it's not from our world." He held up a hand. "Shikamaru, tactical analysis. Sai, aerial support. Keep your distance. I'll handle this." There was no argument. They had seen this before. When a threat of this magnitude appeared, Naruto was the tip of the spear. He didn't wait for the creature to act. He moved. One moment he was standing beside his team. The next, he was gone. He didn't blur or run. He simply ceased to be in one place and appeared in another, 50 yards away, already descending on the monster from above. It was a movement that was neither the body flicker technique nor a simple burst of speed. It was something else, a near-instantaneous translocation that left a faint whisper of displaced air in its wake. It was the shinobi art of speed, perfected and amplified by a spiritual power he was only beginning to understand. He came down like a meteor, his right hand cupped, a swirling sphere of brilliant blue chakra grinding into existence. Odama Rasengan. The creature looked up, its yellow eyes widening a fraction. It was fast, inhumanly so. It raised a massive, clawed hand, and a wave of crimson energy, crackling and dense, erupted from its palm to meet his attack. The collision was apocalyptic. The sound was not an explosion of chakra, but something far more violent and fundamental. It was a deafening roar of raw power, a concussive blast that tore the sky asunder. The Rasengan's grinding force met the crimson energy's explosive pressure, and for a heart-stopping second, they held in equilibrium. Then, Naruto poured more of himself into the technique. The Kyuubi's energy, a tangible red aura, bled into the blue sphere, turning it a volatile violet. The balance shattered. The resulting detonation vaporized a 50-foot radius of the stone courtyard. The creature was thrown back, skidding across the ground, its arm smoking and burned. But it was alive. It pushed itself up, letting out a piercing shriek that was a sound of fury, not pain. Naruto landed lightly on his feet, his sage mode coat billowing around him. He hadn't expected it to be that durable. The crimson energy it wielded, it wasn't chakra. It felt like the pressure he'd been sensing all along, only concentrated, weaponized. It was heavy, visceral, and felt like it was designed to unmake things on a spiritual level. Be careful, Kit. Kurama's voice rumbled in his head, the great fox fully alert. This thing's energy feels hungry. Like a hollow echo of something truly ancient. Naruto didn't need the warning. The creature gathered itself, and the air around it began to shimmer. It opened its mouth, and the crimson energy began to concentrate into a blindingly bright orb. Acero. The name sprang into his mind, unbidden. A fragment of an instinct he didn't know he possessed. He wouldn't give it the chance. He flickered again, appearing directly behind the monster as it was about to fire. He slammed a palm into its back, a seal formula glowing briefly on his skin. Get over here. It was a modified version of the Flying Thunder God technique, a tagless, short-range teleportation jutsu he had developed with the fourth Hokage's notes. The creature was instantly wrenched from its position, hurtling through the air towards a point Naruto had designated, directly into the path of its own attack. The crimson beam of energy, meant for Naruto, slammed into its own master. The beast shrieked as its body was consumed by its own power, the blast carving a deep trench into the coastline and sending a colossal plume of steam and seawater into the sky. From his vantage point, Shikamaru could only watch in awe. Troublesome, he muttered, though a smirk played on his lips. Naruto's growth was staggering. He didn't just fight with overwhelming power anymore. He fought with a terrifying blend of speed, strategy, and brute force that was almost impossible to counter. But it wasn't over. From the heart of the steam cloud, the creature emerged, its body heavily damaged, its bone armor cracked and shattered, but it was still moving. It was regenerating, flesh and armor knitting themselves back together at a visible rate. Its rage had reached a fever pitch. It roared, and the pressure it exerted multiplied, pressing down on them all like a physical weight. Persistent bastard, Naruto grunted. His sage mode was already beginning to tax him. This thing's oppressive aura made gathering natural energy difficult. He needed to end this now. He flashed through a series of hand signs, a blur of motion. Sage art. Massive Rasengan super barrage. 24 shadow clones popped into existence around him, each one forming a giant Rasengan. The air thrummed with the power they gathered. But this time, Naruto did something different. He focused, drawing not just on his own chakra or the Kyuubi's, but on that deeper, more fundamental energy within him, the power of his own soul. His spiritual pressure, the force that Shinigami called Ryutsu, surged outwards. It was a colossal, untamed thing, a vibrant sun of golden energy that dwarfed the creature's hollow malice. The Rasengans in his clone's hands began to change. They took on a golden sheen, their sound shifting from a grinding whir to a high-pitched scream. They felt denser, heavier, more real. Now, he commanded. The clones attacked as one, a storm of golden, spiraling death that descended on the regenerating monster. The creature tried to defend itself, firing off more crimson blasts, but it was overwhelmed. The first Rasengan struck, and it didn't just grind. It detonated. The golden energy exploded with the force of Acero, a violent, spiritual eruption that tore the creature's regeneration to shreds. Then the second hit, and the third, and the fourth. The coastline was rocked by a continuous series of detonations, each one powerful enough to level a city block. The ground shook, the sea churned, and the very air seemed to scream in protest. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but a vast, smoking crater. The creature was gone, its body and soul utterly annihilated. Naruto stood at the edge of the crater, breathing heavily. The last of his sage mode receding. The oppressive pressure in the air vanished, leaving behind a profound silence. The only trace of their battle was the lingering scent of ozone, burnt stone, and something that smelled faintly of ash. Shikamaru let out a long, slow breath. Overkill, you think? Naruto just shook his head, looking at the devastation. I wasn't taking any chances. He turned his gaze back to the spot where the portal had been. The tear in reality was gone, but the air still felt thin, scarred. This is bad, Shikamaru. That thing came from somewhere. Which means there could be more. In a sterile, white dimension of stark angles and endless halls, a man sat upon a throne. His name was Sosuke Aizen, and a gentle, knowing smile graced his features as he observed a shimmering projection before him. The projection showed the battle that had just concluded, the data streaming in from the lingering energy signature of his creation. Subject 12. Designation, Vasto Arankar Prototype. Has been terminated, a calm, synthesized voice announced. Indeed, Aizen said, his voice smooth as silk. He tapped a finger against his chin, his brown eyes gleaming with intellectual curiosity. The energy output of the Jinchuriki, however, was far beyond my projections. It was not merely the demon's chakra. There was something else, a pure, potent spiritual pressure that rivals, no, exceeds that of a captain-class Shinigami. He leaned forward, his interest piqued. The Hogyoku, embedded in his chest, pulsed with a faint, eager warmth, resonating with the power it had just witnessed from across the dimensions. The boy is not just a vessel, Aizen mused to himself. He is a confluence, a perfect hybrid of two worlds. The potential is limitless. His smile widened. Konoha's hero had just painted a massive target on his back. It seems a change of plans is in order. Los Noches will have a new, and most unwilling, king. The Seraite existed in a state of ordered tranquility. Its white walls and serene gardens were a monument to the Gote 13's dominion over the cycle of souls. Yet, within the 1st Division barracks, that tranquility was shattered by the piercing wail of an alarm. It was not the common siren for a hollow sighting, but a deep, resonant chime that echoed through the entire compound, the Koryu, the spiritual current alarm. It only sounded when a spiritual pressure of immense power and unknown origin was detected. In the 10th Division office, Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya's pen froze mid-stroke over a report. His head snapped up, his piercing turquoise eyes narrowing. He felt it, a colossal wave of power that had flared into existence and then vanished, an event so potent it had sent ripples through the Dongai itself. It was chaotic, violent, yet possessed a core of something intensely pure. Captain, his lieutenant's voice called out. Rangiku Matsumoto appeared in the doorway, her usual playful demeanor replaced by a rare flicker of seriousness. Her ample form was clad in the standard shihakusho, but she carried herself with an easy grace that belied the power she held in reserve. Did you feel that? The entire Seraite felt it, Hitsugaya replied. Already on his feet and grabbing his Zanpakuto, Hirenmaru. It came from one of the unmonitored material worlds. Its signature was unprecedented. He didn't like the unknown. The unknown was a variable. And variables were threats. An order for an emergency captain's meeting came via a hell butterfly moments later. Hitsugaya and Rangiku made their way to the assembly hall, joining the other captains who were already gathering. The atmosphere was thick with tension and speculation. Captain Commander Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto stood before them, his ancient eyes closed. His hands resting atop his cane. As you have all sensed, his powerful voice boomed, silencing all chatter, a spiritual anomaly of the highest order has occurred. A surge of Ryutsu eclipsing that of an Espada was released, followed by a violent conflict that resulted in its complete annihilation. The signature of the victor is equally potent, yet it is unregistered. It is not Shinigami, Hollow, or Quincy. Captain Soy Fawn of the 2nd Division spoke first, her tone clipped and severe. An unknown power of that magnitude is a threat to the balance. We must dispatch the Onmitsukido to eliminate it immediately. Now, let's not be hasty, Captain Shunsui Kiraku countered, a hand on the brim of his straw hat. We don't even know what it is. Rushing in blind isn't exactly a winning strategy, is it? Yamamoto slammed the butt of his cane onto the floor, the sharp crack echoing through the hall. Enough. This is not a matter for debate. We require intelligence before action. The anomaly originated from a world known as the Elemental Nations. It is a closed system, rarely interacting with the greater cosmology. Captain Hitsugaya straightened. Sir, UW, I'll take your lieutenant and proceed to the designated coordinates. Your mission is to investigate the source of this power. Identify it, assess its nature, hostile or benign, and report back. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Is that understood? Yes, Captain Commander, Hitsugaya replied with a crisp bow. Dismissed. As the captains dispersed, Rangiku fell into step beside her young captain. The elemental nations, never been. Wonder if they have good sake. Hitsugaya shot her an irritated glare. Matsumoto, this is a serious mission. The power we felt was enough to warp space. Treat it with the respect it deserves. Quote, I know, she said, waving a dismissive hand, though her eyes held a thoughtful gleam. But you have to admit, it's exciting. Something new, something powerful. A shiver, not of fear but of anticipation, ran down her spine. The raw, untamed nature of that energy had called to something primal within her. They proceeded to the Senkaimon, the gateway between worlds. The shimmering portal opened before them, a swirling vortex of unstable energy. With a shared, determined look, they stepped through, leaving the sterile order of the Soul Society behind for the unknown chaos of a new world. They emerged into the cold, salt-laced air of the Konoha coastline. The devastation was the first thing that greeted them. A massive, freshly carved crater dominated the landscape. The earth around it blackened and smoking. The sheer destructive force required to create such a scar was staggering. Several figures in green vests stood at its edge, their expressions a mixture of awe and apprehension. And then they felt it. Or rather, him. Standing at the center of the group was a young man, no older than they were, with spiky blonde hair that shone like the sun and eyes the color of the sky. He was clad in black and orange, a green flak jacket signifying his rank. But it wasn't his appearance that seized their attention. It was his presence, his ritual pressure rolled off him in palpable waves. It was immense, a vast and bottomless ocean of power that made the air thrum around him. It was far greater than what they had sensed from the Seraite. Up close, it was overwhelming. It was the power of a god, yet it felt warm. It wasn't the cold, empty pressure of a hollow, nor the rigid, ordered pressure of a Shinigami. It was vibrant, chaotic, and intensely alive. And beneath the staggering power, there was something else, a profound, aching loneliness that resonated with a part of Rangiku's soul she kept carefully guarded. The shinobi of Konoha immediately tensed at their arrival, kunai appearing in their hands. They moved to form a protective cordon around the blonde man. Hitsugaya stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his zanpakuto. The temperature around him dropped by 20 degrees, frost beginning to creep across the scorched earth. I am Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya of the Gote 13, he announced, his voice sharp and authoritative. We are here to investigate the release of a massive spiritual energy. By the laws of the Soul Society, this area is now under our jurisdiction. The blonde man met his gaze, and his blue eyes were as hard and unyielding as ancient ice. He took a step forward, and the sheer force of his presence seemed to push back against the captain's chilling aura. I don't know what a Gote 13 is, he said. His voice calm but laced with steel, but this is the land of fire. My village, my jurisdiction. A tense silence fell. The two powerhouses stared each other down, a captain of the Soul Society and the hero of Konoha. Neither willing to give an inch. Rangiku watched the standoff, but her attention was fixed on the blonde man. Naruto Uzumaki. She'd heard his name whispered among the Konoha ninja. He was the source of that power. He was the victor. She took a step forward, her voice cutting through the tension, smooth and disarming. Now, let's all just calm down, she said, offering a dazzling smile. My captain can be a little frosty. We're not here to cause trouble. We just need to understand what happened here. Her eyes met Naruto's, and for a moment, the world seemed to fall away. She saw past the power, past the defiance. She saw the exhaustion in his posture, the weight of the world on his young shoulders. She saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, a curiosity that mirrored her own. His gaze was intense, as if he were looking right through her, into her very soul. He smelled of ozone and scorched earth from the battle. But underneath that, there was something else. A faint, clean scent. Like orange blossoms after a spring rain. It was a strange combination, the scent of destructive power and vibrant life. The smell of ash and orange blossoms. Naruto's gaze lingered on her. This woman, her spiritual energy was potent, like a swirling gray storm, but her smile was genuine. Unlike the short, white-haired captain who radiated cold authority, she felt approachable. Her presence was a strange mix of lazy grace and coiled power. He finally broke the stare down with Hitsugaya, his attention shifting fully to Rangiku. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "What happened here?" he said. His voice losing some of its edge. "Was me protecting my home from a monster that tore a hole in the sky to get here. Who you are and why you're here are questions that need answering. But you'll do it in my village. As guests, or as prisoners. Your choice." Hitsugaya's hand tightened on his sword, insulted by the ultimatum. But Rangiku placed a calming hand on his arm. She looked at Naruto, her smile softening into something more genuine, something intrigued. This was no mere human. He commanded respect not through a title, but through an undeniable aura of charisma and sheer, untamed power. And that profound loneliness she sensed, it was a puzzle she found herself wanting to solve. "Guests, of course," she purred, her eyes sparkling with a challenge of their own. "We'd be delighted." The standoff was broken. A temporary truce was formed. But as Naruto Uzumaki turned to lead the two Shinigami back towards his village, he could feel the woman's gaze on his back. The world had just become infinitely larger and more complicated. And for the first time in a long time, faced with a mystery he couldn't solve with his fists, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt since he was a boy. The thrilling, terrifying promise of an adventure just beginning. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Dance of Blades and Words. The walk back to Konoha was a study in contrasts. A fragile, unspoken truce had settled over the small group, thick with the tension of three apex predators forced to share the same territory. On one side was Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya, a being of immense, controlled power. His Ryutsu a tightly coiled blizzard held in check by sheer force of will. The very air around him seemed colder, the leaves on the trees crisping with a faint, unnatural frost as he passed. He walked with a rigid posture, his hand never straying far from the celadon green hilt of Hyarinmaru, his turquoise eyes sweeping the surroundings with a sharp, analytical gaze that missed nothing. He was a perfect soldier of the Gote 13, disciplined, wary, and radiating an aura of lethal authority. On the other side was Rangiku Matsumoto. Where her captain was a glacier, she was a warm summer storm. Her spiritual pressure was a swirling, expansive presence, less controlled but no less powerful, buzzing with a lazy, confident energy. She moved with a fluid grace that was almost a saunter. Her hands tucked into the sleeves of her shihakusho, a playful, curious smile gracing her lips. Yet, beneath the casual exterior, Naruto could sense the coiled strength of a predator at rest. Her eyes, a striking shade of ice blue, held a keen intelligence that observed him with an intensity that was both disarming and unnerving. And then there was him. Naruto Uzumaki, the bridge between them. The reason for their sudden, disruptive appearance in his world. He walked with a relaxed gait, but his senses were fully extended, a seamless blend of sage mode's natural awareness and the raw spiritual perception that was his birthright. He could feel the thrum of life in the forest, the flow of chakra in his teammates following at a discreet distance, and the alien, potent signatures of the two Shinigami behind him. He was a nexus of energies, a living paradox of shinobi discipline and untamed, godlike power. The Kyuubi was quiet within him, watching these newcomers with the ancient, wary patience of a caged deity. They entered Konohagakure through the main gate, drawing immediate and curious stares. The sight of two strangers in stark black robes, carrying swords and radiating an energy that felt utterly foreign, was enough to put the entire village on a low-level alert. Chunin guards straightened their postures, their hands inching towards their weapon pouches. Naruto gave a short, sharp nod to Izumo and Katetsu at the gate, a silent command to stand down but remain vigilant. "I'll take you to the Hokage," Naruto stated, his tone neutral. "She'll want to hear about this personally." Hitsugaya's response was clipped. "That is acceptable. We also require a secure location for a debriefing." "You mean an interrogation," Naruto corrected without heat, glancing back at the much shorter captain. "Let's just call things what they are." A flicker of annoyance crossed Hitsugaya's face, but it was Rangiku who laughed, a bright, musical sound that turned several heads. I like him, she declared to no one in particular. He's direct. The meeting in the Hokage's office was as tense as Naruto had anticipated. Tsunade sat behind her desk, flanked by Kaku Nara and a grim-faced Kakashi Hatake, who had returned to the village with Naruto's team. The air was thick with the silent clash of authority. Hitsugaya, with the unshakable confidence of his station, laid out the Gote 13's position. He spoke of the balance of worlds, of the laws governing spiritual phenomena, and of the grave threat posed by an unregistered power source of Naruto's magnitude. He was professional, concise, and utterly inflexible. He concluded with a demand that was phrased as a request. Therefore, for the security of both our worlds, it is imperative that Naruto Uzumaki accompany us back to the Soul Society for a more thorough evaluation. Tsunade's knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of her desk. Absolutely not, she said, her voice dangerously low. Naruto is a shinobi of this village and its Jinchuriki. He is Konoha's ultimate deterrent and its greatest hero. I will not hand him over to some interdimensional police force based on unsubstantiated fears. Your refusal is an obstruction of our lawful duty, Hitsugaya countered, his ryutsu flaring, dropping the temperature in the room by a noticeable degree. Before Naruto could intervene, Kakashi took a step forward, his single visible eye crinkling in his signature lazy arc, though his posture was anything but relaxed. Perhaps there is a compromise, he suggested, his voice calm and steady. You need to assess the threat. Correct. An evaluation doesn't need to happen in your Soul Society. Why not conduct it here? Hitsugaya's brow furrowed. The idea of operating on foreign soil, surrounded by potential hostiles, was tactically unsound. But before he could refuse, Rangiku spoke up, her tone light and reasonable. The one-eyed man has a point, Captain, she said, placing a hand on Hitsugaya's shoulder. It was a casual gesture, but it instantly diffused the rising tension. We were sent to identify and assess. We can do that just as easily here. It might even be better. We see and observe him in his natural environment, see how his power interacts with his world. It would be a much more accurate report. She turned her smile on Tsunade. We would, of course, require lodgings. And a certain amount of operational freedom. Shikaku Nara, who had been silent until now, stroked his goatee. An extended observation period, he mused. Troublesome, but logical. It avoids an open conflict we can't afford and gives us time to learn more about you. He looked directly at Hitsugaya. The arrangement would have to be mutual. You observe us, we observe you. It was a perfect political solution. A classic Shikamaru-style gambit inherited from his father. It boxed Hitsugaya in. To refuse would be to admit his intentions were not merely assessment but seizure, making the Gote 13 the aggressors. He stared at Rangiku, a silent reprimand in his eyes for her interference, but he could find no flaw in her logic. Fine, he conceded, the word clipped. We will conduct our assessment here. Lieutenant Matsumoto will remain in Konoha and act as the primary observer. I will establish a temporary command post nearby to coordinate and report. He clearly didn't trust leaving Rangiku unsupervised. But it was the only workable option. Naruto had remained silent through the exchange, watching the play of power. He didn't like being the subject of a political negotiation, but he understood the necessity. And he couldn't deny a certain curiosity about the woman who would be his shadow. One condition, Naruto said, his voice drawing all eyes to him. He looked directly at Rangiku. If you're going to be watching me, you're going to do it on my terms. That means you train with me, you eat with me, and you talk with me. No hiding in the shadows. If you want to know who I am, you'll do it to my face. Rangiku's smile widened, a genuine, dazzling thing that lit up her eyes. Now that, she said, her voice dropping to a low, throaty purr, sounds like an offer I can't refuse. The next day began in Training Ground 7, a place of deep personal significance for Naruto. It was where Team 7 had been born, where he had first learned the sting of failure and the strength of camaraderie. It seemed a fitting place to begin this new, strange chapter. He stood in the center of the clearing, clad in simple black training pants and a mesh shirt, stretching his arms over his head. The morning air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth and pine. He waited. He knew she was there, had felt her approach from half a mile away. Her spiritual signature was like a bonfire in the quiet forest. Impossible to miss. Rangiku emerged from the trees, looking less like a soldier on duty and more like someone out for a morning stroll. She had foregone her captain's haori, and her shihakusho was tied loosely at her waist, a large bottle of sake dangling from her hand. "Good morning, Observer-san," Naruto greeted her, not bothering to turn around. "Please, call me Rangiku," she replied, taking a long pull from the bottle. "And you're Naruto-kun, Uzumaki-san, is far too formal for someone I'm going to be watching so closely." He finally turned, a faint smirk on his lips. "All right, Rangiku, so, what's the first test? Are you going to ask me a bunch of questions? Take notes on my daily routine?" She took another drink, wiping her lips with the back of her hand. "Boring," she declared. "Reports are just words. Words can be misleading. I prefer a more hands-on approach." She set the sake bottle down carefully at the edge of the clearing. "I want to see what you can do. The real you. Not the tactical nukes you used on that monster, but the fighter underneath it all. I want to see your skill." She drew the massive blade of her Zanpakuto, Hinata, its hilt tucked under her arm. The sheer size of the weapon was intimidating, yet she held it with an effortless ease. A friendly spar. No killing blows, no city-leveling techniques. Just a dance. Naruto's smirk widened into a full-blown grin. This he understood. This was a language he was fluent in. "All right, you're on." He didn't draw a weapon. He simply fell into a loose, ready stance, his hands open. "But if I win, you're buying me ramen." Quote, "And if I win," she countered, her eyes gleaming, "you're buying me a case of the best sake in this village." Deal. The air snapped with tension. The friendly wager was set. But they both knew this was more than a game. It was a measure. A test of spirit and strength. Rangiku moved first. She didn't charge. She flowed. One moment she was 50 feet away, the next she was on him. Her massive blade scything through the air in a whistling arc aimed at his shoulder. It was a simple, powerful strike, executed with breathtaking speed. Naruto didn't block. He didn't dodge. He simply wasn't there anymore. He flickered, reappearing a foot to her left, his movement so smooth it was like watching a glitch in reality. He tapped her on the shoulder with 2 fingers. Too slow. She spun, the heavy blade moving as if it were weightless, forcing him back. She was impossibly fast for someone wielding such a large weapon. Her swordsmanship was elegant and deadly, a series of sweeping, powerful cuts and deceptive thrusts. Naruto moved with her, a fluid dance of avoidance and misdirection. He was a leaf on the wind, always just outside her blade's reach, his hybrid shunpo body flicker technique allowing for instantaneous, short-range shifts in position that defied conventional tracking. "Not bad," Rangiku panted, a flush of excitement on her cheeks. "You move like a ghost. But you can't dodge forever." "Who said I was dodging?" Naruto replied. He flickered again, this time appearing directly in front of her, inside her guard. Before she could react, he thrust his palm forward. Rasengan. A small, perfect sphere of blue chakra, no bigger than his fist, ground into existence and slammed into her stomach. He held back the power, using it as a konku. SSIVE blast rather than a grinding attack. The impact sent her flying backwards, tumbling through the air. She twisted, landing on her feet with the grace of a cat, a slight grimace on her face. "A dirty trick," she said, though she was smiling. "And what an interesting technique. Pure, focused power. One of my specialties," he called back. This time, she came at him with renewed intensity. The spar escalated. It was a blur of motion. The clash of will against will. Rangiku's skill with a blade was masterful. She forced Naruto to engage, to parry and block with chakra-reinforced limbs. He, in turn, used his clones to create openings, to press the attack from multiple angles, forcing her to constantly adapt. He was fast, strong, and impossibly unpredictable. But she was a master of combat. A Shinigami lieutenant with centuries of experience. She read his feints, anticipated his clones, and her blade was always where it needed to be. They were perfectly, exhilaratingly matched. Finally, Rangiku decided to end it. She leapt back, creating distance. She held her Zanpakuto before her, a serious expression settling on her face. "It's been fun, Naruto-kun. But let's finish this dance. Her spiritual pressure surged, swirling around her like a gray mist. Growl, Hinata. The blade of her sword dissolved into a cloud of razor-sharp ash. The cloud expanded rapidly, a swirling, deadly vortex under her complete control. It wasn't a projectile, it was a shapeless weapon that could attack from any angle, shredding anything it touched. Naruto felt the deadly intent from the ash. This was a Shikai, an entirely different level of power. He couldn't dodge this. He had to meet it head-on. He brought his hands together in a familiar seal. Shadow Clone Jutsu. A single clone appeared beside him. They both thrust their hands out, and in the space between them, a Rasengan began to form. But this one was different. He poured his wind-natured chakra into it, and the sphere erupted into a four-pointed shuriken of pure, screaming energy. Wind style. Rasen Shuriken. The sound it made was deafening, a high-pitched shriek that seemed to tear at the very air. The microscopic wind blades that comprised it were visible as a halo of deadly power. Come on, Rangiku yelled, sending the cloud of ash surging towards him like a tidal wave. Go, Naruto roared, and he and his clone hurled the Rasen Shuriken forward. Ash and wind met in the center of the clearing. The result was not an explosion, but a violent, grinding vortex of annihilation. The Rasen Shuriken's countless wind blades tore into the ash, while the ash tried to envelop and shred the jutsu. For a moment, the two forces battled for supremacy, a swirling sphere of gray and white that kicked up a hurricane of wind and debris. Then, with a final, deafening scream, they canceled each other out, dissipating into nothingness. A profound silence fell over the training ground. Both Naruto and Rangiku were breathing heavily, staring at each other from across the scarred earth. A slow grin spread across both their faces simultaneously. It was a perfect draw. All right, Rangiku panted, the ash reforming into her sword. You win. I'll buy the ramen. Naruto dismissed his clone, his own grin wide and genuine. No, he said, I'll buy the sake. Later that evening, they sat at a small, secluded bar in a corner of Konohake. Known only to the most dedicated drinkers. It was a place Tsunade favored, which meant the sake was the best in the nation. True to his word, Naruto had bought a case. Several bottles were already empty between them. The exhilarating rush of combat had given way to an easy camaraderie. The sake had loosened their tongues, and the questions and answers flowed freely. So this, Hokage, title, Rangiku said, swirling the sake in her cup. It's the leader of the village, the strongest shinobi. That's your dream, to be the one in charge. Naruto stared into his own cup, his expression thoughtful. Not exactly. It's not about being in charge. It's about being acknowledged. When I was a kid, he hesitated, then continued, his voice softer. I was alone. The whole village. They looked at me like I was a monster. The Kyuubi inside me. They hated it, so they hated me. He took a long drink. Becoming Hokage was my way of forcing them to see me. Naruto Uzumaki. Not the demon fox. If I was the one protecting them, the one they all looked up to, they couldn't ignore me anymore. He looked up at her, and his blue eyes were clear and honest. The dreams changed a little since then. It's not about me anymore. It's about protecting this. The village. My friends. They're my family. It's a promise I made to a lot of people I've lost. Rangiku was quiet for a long moment, her usual playful demeanor gone. She saw it then. The deep well of pain and determination behind his sunny exterior. The loneliness she had sensed was real, a scar left by a childhood of isolation. And she understood his drive. It wasn't for power, but for connection, a connection he had been denied for so long. I get that, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Wanting to protect what's important to you, and making promises to people who are gone. Her gaze became distant, a flicker of an old, familiar ache in her eyes. Naruto saw it instantly. It was the same look he saw in Kakashi's eyes sometimes. The look of someone haunted by a ghost. You lost someone too, didn't you? He asked gently. Rangiku was startled by his perception. She usually hid it so well behind her smiles and her teasing. But he saw it. He saw her. She took a deep breath and gave a small, sad smile. Yes, she said. A long time ago. He was complicated. He made a choice, and it took him away. I've been trying to understand why ever since. She didn't say Jin's name. She didn't have to. The weight of it was there in her voice. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the unspoken understanding passing between them. They were both fighters, forged in loss and driven by loyalty. They came from different worlds, wielded different powers, but in that quiet bar, over cheap sake, they found a common ground that transcended all of it. Suddenly, Naruto's head snapped up. His eyes, sharpened by the alcohol and his own innate senses, narrowed. "Someone's watching us," he murmured, his voice low. Rangiku tensed, her hand instinctively going to her Zanpakuto. Her own senses were good, but his were on another level. He wasn't just sensing chakra, he was sensing a soul. A presence. Where? Rooftop. Across the street, Naruto said. He didn't look. He didn't need to. He stood up, placing some bills on the table. "Stay here." Before Rangiku could protest, he flickered. He was gone from the bar without a sound. On the rooftop opposite, a figure in a white cloak and an animal mask straightened up, startled. He had been sure he was undetected. He was a member of Root, one of Danzo's last loyalists, tasked with monitoring the Jinchuriki's new associates. He turned to flee, but a hand clamped down on his shoulder. Naruto stood behind him, his expression cold. "Going somewhere?" he asked. The Root agent spun, drawing a tanto. But Naruto disarmed him with a single, fluid motion. He tapped the agent on the forehead, and the man's eyes rolled back as he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. A pulse of chakra had scrambled his short-term memory. He wouldn't remember the last hour. Naruto looked down at the unconscious spy, a frown on his face. Danzo was dead, but his poison still lingered in the village. It was another fire he had to put out. He reappeared in the bar just as silently as he had left. Rangiku was on her feet, her hand still on her sword. "What was it?" she asked, her eyes scanning him for any sign of a fight. "Just a ghost," Naruto replied, sliding back into his seat. He picked up his sake cup and drained it. "Someone who forgot the war is over." He met her gaze, and the intensity was back in his eyes. "I told you, if you want to watch me, do it to my face. I don't like people hiding in my shadows." Rangiku looked at him, truly looked at him. He wasn't just a vessel of immense power. He wasn't just a hero or a future leader. He was a man of his word, decisive, competent, and fiercely protective of his world. He was more complex and far more compelling than any report could ever convey. She raised her own cup, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. "To doing things face to face," she said. He clinked his cup against hers. "To that," he agreed. The sake tasted better than it had before. The dance was over, but the conversation, the real one, had just begun. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Unseen Executioner. The weeks that followed settled into a strange and compelling rhythm. An unspoken routine forged in the crucible of their initial spar. Mornings were for training, a ritual that had become the anchor of their days. They would meet in the quiet solitude of Training Ground 7. The air still cool with the remnants of night, and they would move. It was no longer about testing or measuring. It had become a form of communication, a language spoken in the whisper of a shunpo, the parry of a blade, and the explosive impact of a jutsu. Naruto learned the nuances of her zanjutsu, the deceptive grace in her sweeping attacks, the coiled power she held in reserve. He learned to anticipate the flow of her movements, the way she shifted her weight a fraction of a second before a lunge. In turn, Rangiku was granted a first-hand education in the sheer, joyful chaos of Naruto's fighting style. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of clones, elemental jutsu, and instantaneous movements that broke every rule of conventional swordsmanship. She learned that his unpredictability was his greatest weapon, a strategic choice born from a lifetime of being underestimated. She saw the keen intellect behind the seemingly reckless charges, the precise calculations in every feint and substitution. It was in these pre-dawn hours, with the world still asleep, that they saw each other most clearly. Two warriors, stripped of titles and politics, finding a rare and exhilarating equal in the other. Their afternoons were spent in the village. Naruto, fulfilling his duties as Jonin commander, would often have Rangiku in tow, a beautiful and slightly out-of-place shadow in her black shihakusho. She watched him mediate disputes between clans, mentor young genin teams, and navigate the labyrinthine politics of the shinobi world with a surprising deftness. She saw the way villagers looked at him now, not with fear, but with a deep, abiding affection and respect. He was their son, and he shone on them all. Through his eyes, she came to understand the fierce, protective love he had for his home. A sentiment that resonated deeply with her own loyalty to the Seraite and her friends. Evenings were for sake and stories. They would find a quiet spot, sometimes the bar, sometimes the top of the Hokage monument, and they would talk. He spoke of Jiraiya's goofy wisdom and Kakashi's quiet strength, of his rivalry with Sasuke and his bond with Sakura. She, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she hadn't in decades. She spoke of her childhood with Jin in the harsh streets of the Rukongai, of the warmth of the 10th Division under the kind but ill-fated Captain Shiba, and of the exasperating but profound loyalty she felt for her current prodigy captain, Hitsugaya. They were piecing each other together, story by story, scar by scar. The loneliness he carried was a mirror to her own, and in that shared reflection, they found a comfort that neither had expected. It was on one such afternoon, after a particularly grueling training session, that everything changed. They were walking through a dense, ancient forest on the outskirts of the village, a place where the trees grew so tall their canopies formed a cathedral of green, filtering the sunlight into dappled, shifting patterns on the forest floor. The air was still and quiet, filled with the scent of moss and damp earth. "I still think you cheated this morning," Rangiku teased, stretching her arms above her head with a contented sigh. "Using 1,000 clones to hide one Rasengan is definitely against the rules of our spar." Naruto grinned, kicking at a loose stone on the path. "There are no rules, only results. Besides, you almost took my head off with that cat ash thingy." "It's called Heineka," she corrected him with mock indignation. "And it's a noble and elegant weapon, thank you very much." He chuckled. "Right, an elegant weapon that can turn me into confetti." The easy banter died on his lips. He stopped dead in the middle of the path. The grin vanished from his face, replaced by an expression of intense, focused alertness. The hairs on his arms stood on end. "Naruto?" Rangiku asked, her own smile fading as she saw the change in him. "What is it?" "Quiet," he breathed. The forest had gone silent. Utterly, unnaturally silent. No birdsong, no rustle of unseen animals in the undergrowth. Even the whisper of the wind in the leaves had ceased. It was a dead, oppressive stillness, as if the entire world were holding its breath. Naruto slowly closed his eyes, extending his senses. He felt the familiar life energy of the trees, the ground, the very air. But there was something else. A void, a patch of absolute nothingness that was moving towards them, a cancerous spot in the natural world. It wasn't just hiding its presence, it was actively erasing it. "Get ready," Naruto said, his voice a low growl. He didn't reach for a kunai. He just settled into a low stance, his entire body a coiled spring of tension. Rangiku drew Heineka, the rasp of steel against its sheath unnaturally loud in the silence. Her own spiritual senses were screaming a warning, a primal instinct telling her that a predator of the highest order was near. She scanned the trees, the deep shadows, the canopy above. Nothing. Then, the air in front of them shimmered. It warped like heat haze, a small pocket of reality twisting in on itself. A figure stepped out of the distortion, coalescing from nothingness into solid form. It was tall and slender, clad in a form-fitting suit of pure white material that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its face was covered by a smooth, featureless porcelain mask, devoid of any eye holes or markings. It carried no weapon. It simply stood there, its posture relaxed, yet exuding an aura of absolute, chilling purpose. The moment it appeared, the oppressive feeling intensified. It was like being at the bottom of a deep ocean. The pressure wasn't spiritual in the way Rangiku understood it. It didn't feel like Ryutsu. It felt fundamental. It was a targeted suppression, a force that seemed to actively unmake the energy around it. "Who are you?" Naruto demanded, his voice ringing with authority. The figure didn't respond. It simply tilted its head, a gesture of cold, clinical curiosity. Naruto acted first. No warning, no preamble. He flickered, crossing the 20-yard gap between them in an instant, his fist cocked back for a jaw-shattering punch. It was a move that had caught cage-level opponents off guard. He might as well have been moving through molasses. As his fist entered a 5-foot radius around the white-clad figure, he felt an incredible, invisible resistance. His speed, his momentum, all of it was instantly negated. It was like punching solid steel. He grunted in surprise, thrown off balance. The figure moved. Its movements were economical, precise. Without a single wasted motion. It didn't counterattack. It simply placed a hand on Naruto's chest. A complex, circular symbol, like an intricate piece of sacred geometry, glowed on its palm. "Dispel," a voice said. It was neuter, synthesized, without inflection or emotion. Naruto felt a sickening lurch in his gut. The vast, roaring ocean of chakra within him, the power of the Kyuubi. The energy he had commanded his entire life, it all just vanished. It was gone, not sealed, not blocked. It felt as if it had ceased to exist. He was cut off from it completely. Panic, a cold and unfamiliar sensation, tried to grip him, but years of battlefield discipline slammed it down. He reacted on pure instinct, twisting his body and kicking off the ground, putting distance between himself and the enemy. He landed beside Rangiku, breathing heavily, his mind racing. "My chakra, it's gone." Rangiku's eyes widened in shock. "What?" She focused her own power, her ryutsu swirling around her. "Growl, Hinata." Nothing happened. The blade of her Zanpakuto remained solid steel. She stared at it, a cold dread seeping into her heart. She tried again, pouring her will, her very soul into the command. The sword didn't even tremble. The connection to her Shikai was severed. "Fascinating," the synthesized voice said. The figure took a step forward. Subject Alpha, the Jinchuriki. Chakra nullified. Subject Beta, the Shinigami. Zanpakuto release suppressed. The zone of silence is performing to specifications. Subject. Rangiku snarled, her fear transmuting into fury. She abandoned her Shikai and charged, relying on her raw swordsmanship. Her blade was a silver blur, a master-class display of speed and precision aimed at the figure's neck. The masked executioner didn't even try to dodge. It raised a single hand, catching the flat of Rangiku's massive blade on its palm. The sound of the impact was a dull thud, and the sword stopped dead, its momentum completely absorbed. Rangiku stared in disbelief. No one, not even Captain Zaraki, could stop her blade so effortlessly. The figure twisted its wrist, and with impossible strength, wrenched Hinata from her grasp. The sword was flung aside, embedding itself deep into the trunk of a giant tree. It then delivered a swift, precise chop to Rangiku's shoulder, striking a nerve cluster. Her entire arm went numb, and she cried out, stumbling back. Naruto saw red. In that moment, he wasn't a commander, he wasn't a hero. He was a man watching someone he cared about get hurt. With his chakra gone, he fell back on the most basic, brutal training of his youth. Taijutsu. He exploded forward, a flurry of kicks and punches, each one aimed with vicious intent. It was a futile effort. The figure in white was a master of a martial art Naruto had never seen. It didn't block, it redirected. It didn't counter, it disrupted. Every one of Naruto's powerful strikes was turned aside with a gentle touch, a slight shift of its body. It moved with a terrifying, fluid efficiency, using Naruto's own momentum against him. It was like fighting a river. Analysis. Subject Alpha's raw physical capabilities remain impressive, even without chakra enhancement. The voice stated calmly in the middle of the fight. Adaptability is high, combat instincts are primal. Naruto gritted his teeth, frustration and fury building. This wasn't a fight, it was an assessment. He was being dissected, analyzed like a bug under a microscope. He roared, feinting a high kick and dropping low, sweeping his leg to take the figure's feet out from under it. The figure simply bent its knees at an unnatural angle, allowing the sweep to pass harmlessly under its feet, then straightened up and delivered a sharp, stabbing kick to Naruto's solar plexus. The air rushed from his lungs in a single, painful gasp, and he was sent flying back, crashing into the same tree where Hinata was embedded. He slumped to the ground, gasping for air, spots dancing in his vision. He was powerless. For the first time since he was a child, he felt utterly, completely powerless. All his strength, all his world-shaking techniques, were useless. Rangiku rushed to his side, her good arm supporting him. "Naruto, are you all right?" "I'm fine," he wheezed, pushing himself up. They stood back to back, a defiant island in a sea of silent, hostile forest. The figure in white stood before them, impassive. Its head tilted as if processing data. "You talk about us like we're experiments," Rangiku spat, her voice laced with venom. "Who sent you? Who are you?" "We are the equilibrium," the voice replied. "We are the surgeons who will correct the great imbalance. Your existences, powerful and untethered, are a sickness. A threat to the ordained structure of reality." The figure raised its hand. The geometric pattern on its palm beginning to glow with a soft, white light. Phase 1 of the assessment is complete. Data acquired. Phase 2 requires a biological sample. A painless procedure, I assure you. It began to walk towards them, its steps slow and deliberate. There was nowhere to run. Its speed was clearly superior. There was no way to fight. Their powers were nullified. This was it. Checkmate. Naruto's mind raced, sifting through every jutsu, every strategy he had ever learned. Nothing. They were all useless without chakra. He looked at Rangiku, her face pale but set in a mask of defiance. Ready to fight to the death with her bare hands if she had to. He saw her bravery, her loyalty, her refusal to break. And something inside him snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a primal, soul-deep refusal to lose. A refusal to let this sterile, passionless thing harm her. A refusal to fail. He had made a promise to himself long ago. He would never again be helpless while his friends were in danger. He felt a pull, not from his stomach, where the Kyuubi resided, but from the very center of his chest. It was a deep, resonant thrum, a chord of power he had never felt before. It wasn't the warm, vibrant energy of chakra, nor the wild, raging power of the demon fox. This was his. It was the fundamental energy of his soul, the core of his very being. And it was roaring to life in defiance of the oppressive silence. "What is this?" Kurama's voice echoed in his mind, a rare note of genuine surprise in the fox's tone. "Kit, this power, it's not mine." The light from the equilibrium agent's hand intensified as it drew closer. Naruto pushed Rangiku behind him, facing it down. He closed his eyes and focused on that thrumming in his chest, pouring all his will, all his desperation, all his protective instinct into it. "I will not let you," he growled, the words torn from his throat. His right hand clenched into a fist at his side, and in his hand, something began to form. It wasn't chakra, it was solid, real. It started as a faint shimmer, then coalesced into a tangible object. A hilt. It was a simple, unadorned thing. The grip was wrapped in crimson cloth, worn and comfortable, as if it had been held 1,000 times before. The pommel was a simple ring of dark, burnished steel, and the guard was a small, solid rectangle of the same material. There was no blade. It was just a hilt, but the moment his fingers closed around it, a wave of incandescent power erupted from his soul. It was a raw, untamed spiritual pressure, golden and fierce. A newborn sun exploding into existence. It slammed into the equilibrium's zone of silence, not as a technique, but as a fundamental truth of his existence. The oppressive, nullifying field flickered, distorted, and then shattered like glass. The connection to his chakra, to the Kyuubi, to his very life force, came rushing back in a dizzying flood. Rangiku gasped behind him as Shife. The link to Hinata snapped back into place, her Zanpakuto humming with power from across the clearing. The equilibrium agent stopped dead, taking a half step back for the first time. Its masked face was turned towards the crimson hilt in Naruto's hand. "Impossible," the synthesized voice whispered, the first hint of inflection it had ever shown. "A soul-forged weapon, a nascent Zanpakuto. The hybridization is deeper than projected. The anomaly is reclassified. Threat level, transcendent." The figure did not press the attack. Its mission parameters had clearly changed. With a final, lingering look at the hilt in Naruto's hand, it raised its arm. "The equilibrium has been notified. The imbalance will be purged. Your existence will be corrected." The air behind it warped, and it stepped back into the distortion, vanishing as silently as it had arrived. The oppressive silence was gone. The forest came alive again with the sound of birds and wind. The fight was over. Naruto stood panting, his body trembling with adrenaline and the aftershock of the raw power that had flowed through him. He looked down at his hand. The crimson hilt felt warm, solid, impossibly real. It hummed with a faint, steady power that felt like his own heartbeat. Rangiku came to stand beside him, her eyes wide with an emotion he couldn't quite read. It was a mixture of awe, shock, and a dawning, profound understanding. She was a Shinigami. She had spent centuries in the Soul Society. She knew exactly what she was looking at. It was the genesis of a soul-slaying sword. The birth of a Zanpakuto. Naruto. She breathed, her voice filled with wonder. What are you? He looked from the hilt to her face, his own expression a mask of confusion and exhaustion. The hilt in his hand felt like a question, a key to a part of himself he never knew existed. And as it slowly faded from his grip like a dream upon waking, he knew one thing for certain. His world, and his place in it, had just been irrevocably, terrifyingly, and wonderfully changed forever. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Soul. The report sent by Captain Hitsugaya detonated in the serene halls of the Seraite with the force of a tectonic shock. It was delivered via a high-speed Jigokucho, its contents classified to a level that required the personal seals of all 13 captains to unseal. They gathered in the 1st Division's assembly hall, the atmosphere thick with a gravity not felt since the announcement of Aizen's betrayal. The data was projected onto the air via Kido, stark white text and diagrams hanging like ghosts in the silent room. The words painted a terrifying picture. A new, unknown enemy of immense power, referring to themselves as the Equilibrium. An organization possessing techniques capable of completely nullifying both chakra and ryutsu, effectively rendering both shinobi and shinigami powerless. A direct assault on two of their own, a captain-level combatant and a being of unprecedented power, ending not in their defeat, but in the enemy's tactical retreat after gathering data. But it was the final, most explosive revelation that held every captain in stunned silence. A single, clear image of Naruto Uzumaki, standing defiant, his hand clenched around the crimson hilt of a nascent Zanpakuto. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the Kido projection. Impossible, Byakuya Kuchiki stated, his voice a low, cold whisper that nonetheless carried the weight of his shock. His aristocratic composure was fractured, his gloved hands clenched into tight fists. Zanpakuto are forged by Asachi. They are the birthright of Shinigami. A mortal human, a Jinchuriki, for him to manifest one from the core of his own soul is a violation of the natural order. And yet, the evidence is before us. Shunsui Kyoraku murmured, his usual lazy demeanor gone, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. He tilted his straw hat back, his gaze fixed on Naruto's image. It seems our Jinchurik, friend is far more than just a vessel for a demon. He is a threat. Soi Fan snapped, her small frame vibrating with militant fury. A hybrid, an anomaly of this magnitude, cannot be allowed to exist unchecked. His power is a beacon for chaos. This equilibrium is proof of that. They were drawn to him. He is the cause of this instability. Or perhaps he is the solution, Jashiro Yukitaki countered gently, a thoughtful hand on his chin despite the cough that rattled his frail body. This enemy, the equilibrium, they defeated both the captain and the Jinchuriki with ease. It was only this K power of Naruto-kun's that drove them away. It may be a power we need. The hall erupted into debate, a cacophony of voices, strategic, dogmatic, and aggressive. Kenpachi Zaraki was laughing, a wild, bloodthirsty grin splitting his face at the prospect of two new, incredibly powerful opponents to fight. Mayuri Kuretsuchi was practically vibrating with a grotesque, scientific glee at the thought of dissecting such a unique specimen. The Gote 13, the pillar of stability in the Soul Society, was a house divided. Through it all, Captain Commander Yamamoto remained as still and silent as a statue, his ancient eyes closed. Finally, he slammed the butt of his cane on the floor. The resulting boom was like a thunderclap, instantly silencing the room. The spiritual pressure that rolled off him was immense. A wave of heat and raw power that reminded every captain of their place. Enough, his voice boomed, resonating with the authority of 1,000 years. Your bickering is pointless. The situation has evolved. The Jinchuriki, Naruto Uzumaki, is no longer a mere curiosity or a potential threat. He is the focal point of a conflict that has already spilled over into our jurisdiction. His power is a reality we can no longer afford to simply observe. He opened his eyes, and they burned with a fire that had forged the Gote 13 itself. We do not know the strength or the goals of this equilibrium. We do not understand the true nature of the Jinchuriki's power. This ignorance is a weakness we cannot tolerate. He leveled his gaze at the assembled captains. A formal summons will be issued. Naruto Uzumaki will come to the Soul Society. Not for assessment, not for interrogation. He will come for a council of war. He is now a key player on the board, whether we wish it or not. His declaration was final. It was not a request. It was the turning of a page in history. Back in Konoha, the aftermath of the attack was a quiet, tense affair. Naruto and Rangiku had given their report to Tsunade and her inner circle. The gravity of the encounter settling over the office like a shroud. The concept of an enemy that could simply turn off their power was a shinobi's worst nightmare. Naruto sat on the roof of the hospital, looking out over the village he had nearly died to protect. The crimson hilt had vanished moments after the equilibrium agent, fading from his grasp like smoke. But the feeling of it remained, a phantom weight, a hum of power deep in his soul. It was a part of him, a truth he could no longer ignore. He was more than just a shinobi, more than just a Jinchuriki. He was something else. The sound of soft footsteps announced Rangiku's arrival. She came to stand beside him, a bottle of sake in her hand, which she offered to him wordlessly. He took a long, grateful swallow. Hitsugaya Taicho sent a message, she said, her voice soft. The captain commander has read the report. They're issuing a formal summons. They want you to come to the Soul Society. Naruto stared at the lights of the village. 1,000 points of warmth and life against the encroaching darkness. A week ago, he would have refused. He would have told them to go to hell. His duty was here. But the masked agent, the equilibrium, had changed the equation. This wasn't a threat to Konoha, it was a threat to everything. This enemy, Naruto said, his voice a low rumble. They aren't shinobi. They aren't from this world. Your world is their next target, isn't it? Probably, Rangiku admitted, leaning against the railing. They see power as a sickness. The Gote 13 is the most powerful organization in our world. We're a feast for surgeons like them. He took another drink, the strong liquor doing little to calm the storm in his mind. He had to go. He knew it. To refuse would be to bury his head in the sand. To wait for an enemy he couldn't beat to come and burn his world down. He needed answers. He needed to understand what he was, and what he was up against. And the only people who might have those answers were the ones who carried swords forged from their own souls. All right, he said, his voice firm with decision. I'll go. He turned to look at her, a wry smile touching his lips. But you're sticking with me. I'm going to need someone to translate all the weird ghost talk. Rangiku's answering smile was brilliant, a flash of light in the growing dusk. Wouldn't miss it for the world, she said. But you should know, the Seraite isn't like Konoha. The captains, they're old, powerful, and proud. They won't see you as a hero. They'll see you as a problem to be solved. Good, Naruto said, his eyes hardening with a familiar, defiant fire. I've been a problem my whole life. I'm used to it. The journey through the Dongai was a disorienting, psychedelic experience. Flanked by Rangiku and a stoic, silent Hitsugaya, Naruto moved through a chaotic, rushing tunnel of cosmic energy, the Koryu, that connected the worlds. His senses were overwhelmed, the sheer pressure of the turbulent void pressing in on him. But his own spiritual power, now awakened and aware, pushed back, creating a small island of stability around him. He felt like a ship navigating a hurricane. His will the only thing keeping him from being torn apart. Then, they burst through into clean, still air. Naruto blinked, his eyes adjusting to the bright, clear light. Before him lay a sight that stole his breath away. A massive, circular city of pristine white stone, gleaming under a serene blue sky. The Seraite. It was a monument of order and power, its architecture clean and ancient, exuding a sense of permanence that made even Konoha's long history feel fleeting. The air itself felt different, heavy with a latent spiritual energy that made his skin tingle. Their arrival at the main gate was met by a contingent of Shinigami, their faces impassive masks of military discipline. At their head was Byakuya Kuchiki, his presence as cold and sharp as the winter wind. He did not acknowledge Naruto. His gaze reserved for Hitsugaya. Hitsugaya Taicho, he said, his voice a silken baritone. The captain commander awaits you in the assembly hall. The guest will be escorted. The word, guest, was layered with a dozen other meanings, none of them welcoming. Naruto met the nobleman's gaze without flinching. He could feel the immense, tightly controlled power radiating from the man. A pressure as vast and deep as a frozen ocean. As they walked the clean, white streets, Naruto became a spectacle. Shinigami of all ranks stopped and stared, their whispers following him like a flock of birds. He ignored them. His attention focused on the sheer scale of the place, the crushing weight of its history and power. This was the heart of the world Rangiku came from, a fortress of souls. And he was walking into its deepest chamber. The assembly hall was vast and intimidating. 12 figures stood in a line on one side of the room, their presence so immense that the very air seemed to crackle around them. On the other side, a lone figure stood waiting for him. The captain commander. Naruto felt his power first. A dry, searing heat, the pressure of a sun held barely in check. The old man was a living inferno. Naruto walked to the center of the room and stopped. He stood alone, the focal point of 13 of the most powerful beings in existence. The collective weight of the spiritual pressure was a physical force, designed to intimidate, to crush, to force him to his knees. But Naruto did not bend. He met it with his own, a pressure that was not hot or cold, but vibrant, chaotic, and boundless as the sky. It was the pressure of life itself, and it held its ground. The silent battle of wills lasted for a heart-stopping minute. Kenpachi's grin widened. Shunsui's eyes, hidden by his hat, narrowed in appreciation. Yamamoto's ancient gaze held a flicker of something akin to surprise. "You are Naruto Uzumaki." Yamamoto's voice boomed, not a question, but a statement of fact. "I am," Naruto replied, his own voice steady and clear, ringing with a confidence that defied his position. "And you're the one who wanted to see me." A vein throbbed in Soi Fan's temple at his lack of deference. "You will address the captain commander with respect, human." Naruto's gaze slid to her, his blue eyes as hard as diamonds. "Respect is earned, not demanded. I came here as an ally to discuss a mutual threat, not as a prisoner to be lectured." "An ally?" Byakuya scoffed softly. "You are an anomaly. Your very existence is a disruption. You are the reason this new enemy has emerged." "No," Naruto countered, his voice rising, taking on a commanding edge that silenced the room. "They emerge because they are afraid of power they can't control. Just like you are." He swept his gaze across the line of captains. "You see me, and you don't see a person. You see a weapon you don't have the key to. A power you want to contain, categorize, and put in a box. But I'm not a weapon. I'm a shinobi of Konohagakure. And my world will not be the battleground for a war between ghosts and fanatics." His words hung in the air, a direct and stunning challenge. He had seized control of the narrative, framing himself not as a subject to be judged, but as a world leader demanding his place at the table. From a high balcony overlooking the hall, a new voice sneered. "Such arrogance. Captains of the Gote 13 are the arbiters of order in this universe. You are a child playing with fire you cannot comprehend." Naruto looked up. Seated on ornate chairs were the members of the Central 46. The judiciary and ruling council of the Soul Society, their faces hidden behind traditional screens. "The decision of how to handle you rests with us, boy," another voice from the council declared. "You and the demon you contain will be placed under our direct authority. You will be sealed, your power studied and neutralized for the good of the balance. Your compliance is irrelevant." It was the ultimate provocation. A declaration that his life, his will, his world, meant nothing. Naruto didn't shout. He didn't lash out. A profound, deadly calm settled over him. The vibrant energy he radiated began to coalesce, to concentrate. The air in the room grew heavy, thick, and difficult to breathe. "You talk about balance," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. "But you don't want balance. You want control. You would sacrifice anyone, anything, to maintain your power." His head lifted, and his blue eyes began to glow with a faint, golden light. "You want to seal me away. You want to neutralize me." He let out a breath, and a wave of power erupted from him that shook the Seraite to its foundations. It was not the wild, raging chakra of the Kyuubi. It was not the sharp, focused energy of a Shinigami's Ryutsu. This was something older, something primordial. It was a colossal, ancient pressure that felt like the birth of a star. A power so immense and so pure that it dwarfed everything in the room. The captain staggered. Soi Fan was forced to a knee. Byakuya's hands flew to the hilt of his sword, his composure shattered. Even Shunsui and Yukitake took an involuntary step back. Kenpachi's maniacal grin was wiped from his face, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. On the balcony, the screen's BEF, or the Central 46 cracked and shattered from the sheer spiritual density. Only Yamamoto stood his ground, his cane creaking in his grip, his eyes wide open, staring at Naruto not as a boy, but as an equal force of nature. In that moment, he felt the ghost of a power he had not sensed in 1,000 years, a power that reminded him of the Soul King in his prime. Naruto's voice echoed in the now silent hall, each word imbued with the weight of a god. My power isn't a fire you can extinguish. It's the sun, and you are not worthy to stand in its light. The golden aura receded as quickly as it had come, collapsing back into him. He stood there, breathing evenly, his point made with a clarity that no argument could ever achieve. He was not a problem to be solved. He was not a weapon to be contained. He was a king in his own right, the master of a power they could not comprehend, and he had just put the entire Soul Society on notice. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Echoes in the Glass. The silence that followed Naruto's display of power was a living entity. It was heavier than stone, colder than the grave, and it pressed down on the 13 captains of the Gote 13 with the weight of a dawning, terrifying revelation. The boy, the man, before them was not simply a container for a great power, he was the great power. His soul was a furnace, and they had spent the last hour debating how best to capture the sun in a bottle. The golden pressure vanished, retreating into Naruto as if it had never been, but the afterimage was burned into their spiritual senses. The cracked screens of the Central 46's balcony served as a stark, physical reminder of their hubris. The Judiciary Council was silent, their authority shattered by a force they could not comprehend, let alone command. Yamamoto was the first to regain his composure, his ancient mind processing the new reality with the cold pragmatism of a 1,000-year-old commander. He saw the shift in the room. Soi Fan's militant fury had been replaced by a wary, grudging respect. Byakuya's aristocratic disdain was now laced with a profound, unsettling uncertainty, and Kenpachi's bloodlust had transformed into something approaching religious awe. The council is adjourned. Yamamoto's voice boomed, though it had lost its earlier whip-crack certainty. It was the voice of a man recalculating the entire strategic map of the cosmos. He turned his burning gaze to Naruto. You will be given quarters in the 10th Division's barracks, under the watch of Captain Hitsugaya. You will not leave the Seraite. We have much to discuss. It was still a command. But it was no longer an ultimatum. It was a holding action. Naruto gave a short, sharp nod. He had made his point. He had established his sovereignty in the only language they seemed to understand. Now, for the first time, they could begin to talk. The next few days were a strange, isolating purgatory. Naruto was shown to a Spartan but comfortable room, a space that felt more like a gilded cage than guest quarters. The Shinigami of the 10th Division gave him a wide berth, their expressions a mixture of fear and awe. They would snap to attention when he passed, their eyes fixed on a point just over his shoulder. As if direct eye contact might cause them to combust. He was a walking deity, an unpredictable force, and the suffocating order of the Seraite did not know how to process him. Rangiku was his only constant. She became his guide, his translator, and his sole companion in the sterile white city. She showed him the sprawling grounds, pointed out the different division barracks, and tried to explain the Gote 13's complex social and military structure. But even her usual vibrant energy was somewhat muted. She, too, had been shaken by his display. The power he unleashed went beyond anything she had ever felt. It made the Ryutsu of the Captain Commander feel like a candle next to a supernova. She found herself looking at him differently, seeing the layers of loneliness, defiance, and now this terrifying, primordial power that dwelled within him. The handsome, intriguing man she'd been getting to know was also something far, far more. The political street. Alamate was broken by the click-clack of Geta sandals. They were sitting on the steps of the 10th Division's barracks, sharing a stolen bottle of sake under the pale, artificial light of the Soul Society's sky. When a figure appeared from the shadows. He was a lanky man with shaggy blonde hair, a green and white striped bucket hat casting a perpetual shadow over his eyes. A fan was held nonchalantly in one hand. My, the man said. His voice a lazy, cheerful drawl. If it isn't the talk of the town. And Lieutenant Matsumoto, lovely as ever. I hope I'm not interrupting. Rangiku was on her feet in an instant. Her hand on Hineka's hilt. Urahara Kazuki, what are you doing here? Naruto remained seated, but his senses flared. This man, he felt like a puzzle. His spiritual pressure was immense. Easily on par with the other captains, but it was deliberately suppressed, hidden behind a mask of cheerful apathy. Beneath the surface, however, Naruto could feel a mind that was constantly moving, calculating. A razor-sharp intellect that was anything but lazy. Just came to see what all the fuss was about, Urahara said with a wave of his fan. And to perhaps offer a way out of this, awkward staring contest you've all found yourselves in. He gave Naruto a knowing look. It's never a good idea to embarrass the old men who run the world, you know. It makes them terribly grumpy. A meeting was convened an hour later. This one far smaller and more clandestine. In Yamamoto's private chambers sat the captain commander, Shunsui, Yukitaki, Hitsugaya, Rangiku, and Naruto. Urahara stood before them, his fan snapping shut with a decisive click. While you've all been fretting over how to handle our new friend, he began, his tone losing some of its playful edge, Aizen has not been idle. My sources have located one of his hidden research facilities in the world of the living. It's an old one, abandoned shortly after his defection. But it's what was inside that's interesting. He paused for dramatic effect. The facility specialized in soul splicing and holification research. Specifically, it seems to be where he conducted his early experiments on Shinigami. Including, he let his gaze drift to Rangiku. Jin Ichimaru. The name landed like a physical blow. Rangiku flinched, her breath catching in her throat. Her face, which had been a mask of professional curiosity, became pale and drawn. Urahara continued, his voice softer now. I believe Jin may have used the facility for his own purposes after Aizen abandoned it. A back door, a place to conduct his own research, away from prying eyes. If we want to understand what Aizen is planning next, and perhaps get a clearer picture of Jin's true motivations, that lab is our best source of intelligence. The unspoken proposal hung in the air. This was a mission of critical importance. But sending a full captain detail would be too overt and could trip Aizen's alarms. It required a small, deniable team. Shunsui, ever the shrewd politician, saw the angle immediately. A perfect opportunity, he said, looking at Naruto. A chance for Uzumaki-san to demonstrate his cooperative spirit. He aids the Gote 13 in a vital mission, and in return, we re-evaluate our position on his status. A gesture of goodwill on both sides. It was a perfect way to save face. It turned Naruto from a potential prisoner into a provisional ally. Yamamoto stroked his long beard, his ancient eyes considering the proposal. It was a logical, strategic move. I'll go, Naruto said before anyone could debate it further. His gaze was on Rangiku. He saw the storm of emotions in her eyes, grief, hope, fear. He saw the tremor in her hands. This wasn't just a mission for her, it was a ghost hunt. But she goes with me. Alone. Hitsugaya opened his mouth to protest. But Yukitaki placed a calming hand on his shoulder. He's right, the white-haired captain said. This is a personal matter for Lieutenant Matsumoto. And Naruto-kun has N more than capable of handling himself. A small, two-person team has the best chance of getting in and out undetected. Yamamoto gave a slow, deliberate nod. Very well. Urahara will provide the coordinates and a gateway. Find out what Aizen is planning. Report back immediately. Do not fail. The air of Karakura town was thick with the smells of asphalt and exhaust, a stark, jarring contrast to the sterile purity of the Seraite. They emerged from the Senkaimon in the back of Urahara's candy shop, the transition leaving Naruto feeling slightly off-kilter. The world of the living felt thin. The natural energy was a pale imitation of his own worlds, and the spiritual density was almost non-existent. Rangiku had been silent since the meeting, her usual effervescence replaced by a fragile, brittle quiet. She moved with a purpose Naruto hadn't seen before, her focus absolute. She was a woman on a pilgrimage to a place she never wanted to visit. The lab was located beneath an abandoned steel mill on the industrial outskirts of the town. The entrance was hidden behind a rusted-out boiler, a complex keto seal serving as the only lock. Rangiku placed her hand on it, channeling a small, precise amount of her ryutsu. The seal glowed and dissolved. It's keyed to Jin's spiritual signature, and those he designated, she explained, her voice tight. Aizen, Tosin, and me. The words hung in the cold, damp air. He had left her a key. The lab was a sterile, white nightmare. Glass tubes, large enough to hold a person, lined the walls, filled with a murky, stagnant fluid. Discarded iCal tools and complex monitoring equipment lay scattered on metal tables. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and a faint, coppery tang that Naruto recognized as old blood. It was a place of profound suffering. Aizen's work, Rangiku whispered, her expression a mixture of disgust and sorrow. They moved deeper, Naruto's senses on high alert for any lingering traps or guardians. He found none. The place was truly abandoned. A tomb of forgotten sins. They found the main data terminal in a central chamber, a large, crystalline console that hummed with a faint, residual power. Rangiku's fingers flew across the holographic interface, her training as a lieutenant coming to the forefront. She bypassed Aizen's security protocols with practiced ease, her face illuminated by the eerie blue glow of the screen. Here it is, she murmured. Aizen's research. My God. Naruto looked over her shoulder. The screen was filled with horrifying data. Genetic sequencing of hollows, failed experiments to merge Shinigami and hollow souls, casualty reports listed in cold, clinical numbers. It was a catalog of atrocities. He saw files detailing new prototypes, a Rancor stronger and more stable than the one he had fought. Their creation accelerated by the Hogyoku. Aizen wasn't just building an army, he was trying to create a new form of life, with himself as its god. There's more, Rangiku said, her voice trembling slightly. She opened a separate, heavily encrypted partition. The file name was a single, simple word, Heineka. This is Jin's. The contents of this partition were different. There was no data on creating monsters. Instead, it was a meticulous, obsessive study of one thing, the Hogyoku. Jin had spent decades secretly analyzing its energy signatures, its growth patterns, its weaknesses. He had been searching for a way to stop Aizen from the inside, a single, critical flaw he could exploit. The files detailed his plan, to allow Aizen to fully merge with the Hogyoku, and then, at the moment of its final transformation, to use a specialized keto hidden within his own body to steal it, creating a fatal vulnerability. It was a suicide mission, a plan with a 1 in a billion chance of success. He had been playing the long game, a lone spy in the heart of the enemy camp, for her sake. At the bottom of the research, there was a single, isolated file. A personal log. Rangiku's hand hesitated for a moment before she opened it. There was no text, no sound. It was just a simple, static image. A memory, preserved in spiritual energy. It was a field of persimmons, the fruit hanging heavy and orange from the branches. It was the place where they had first met as starving children, the place where he had promised he would never make her cry again. Beneath the image was a single line of transcribed audio. His voice, calm and detached, but with an undercurrent of something she had never allowed herself to hear. If you were to turn into a snake tomorrow and begin devouring humans, and from the same mouth you devoured humans, you cried out to me, I love you, would I still be able to say, I love you, the same way I do today? It wasn't a question he was asking Aizen. It was a question he had been asking himself. A justification for the monstrous path he had chosen. That was all. No apology. No grand confession. Just a single, shared memory and a cryptic, heartbreaking question. A single, silent tear traced a path down Rangiku's cheek. Then another. She didn't sob. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, her shoulders shaking, as the weight of decades of uncertainty, of betrayal and hope and loss, finally came crashing down on her. He hadn't abandoned her. He hadn't betrayed her. He had been trying to protect her, to reclaim what Aizen had stolen from her all those years ago. And he had done it in the only twisted, lonely way he knew how. Naruto didn't say a word. He didn't offer platitudes or try to tell her it would be okay. He knew that some wounds were too deep for words. He simply stood beside her, a quiet, solid presence in the cold, sterile lab. He remembered the crushing weight of Jiraiya's death, the feeling of being left behind. By someone who was more than just a teacher. He understood. After a long moment, he gently reached out and took her hand. His hand was warm and calloused, a stark contrast to the cold of the lab. He didn't pull her into an embrace. He just held her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it in a slow, comforting rhythm. It was a simple, profound gesture of shared understanding. A silent message. You are not alone in this. Rangiku's fingers tightened around his, clinging to his warmth like a drowning woman clinging to a lifeline. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the tears now flowing freely. And for the first time since Jin had walked away from her, she allowed herself to truly grieve. They stood like that for a long time, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the cold data of a coming war. In the shared silence, in the simple act of holding a hand, something shifted between them. The witty banter, the flirtatious challenges, the camaraderie of the training grounds, it all fell away, revealing the raw, vulnerable truth beneath. It was no longer a dance. It was a connection, forged in a crucible of shared loss and quiet understanding. In the heart of Aizen's forgotten laboratory of horrors, two powerful, lonely souls had finally, truly found each other. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. When Worlds Bleed. The return to the Soul Society was a journey through a muted world. The chaotic, vibrant energies of the Dongai seemed distant, the silence between Naruto and Rangiku more profound than the roaring cosmic winds. The shared grief and understanding in the cold, sterile lab had forged a new kind of bond between them. One that didn't need the easy armor of banter or the thrill of a spar. It was a quiet, deep-seated recognition, a silent acknowledgement that they had seen the most vulnerable parts of each other's souls. He saw the woman haunted by a ghost she had finally laid to rest, and she saw the man who stood as a steadfast anchor in her storm, asking for nothing in return. They delivered their findings with a stark, grim efficiency. The crystalline console from Aizen's lab was brought before the assembled captains, Urahara skillfully extracting its data and projecting it for all to see. The images of holofication experiments, the cold calculus of soul splicing, and the projections for a new generation of Arankar sent a chill through the assembly hall that had nothing to do with Hitsugaya's Ryutsu. This was confirmation of their worst fears. Aizen wasn't just continuing his work, he was accelerating it, perfecting it with the limitless power of the Hogyoku. But it was Jin's personal logs that truly stunned them. The meticulous, decades-long research into the Hogyoku's weaknesses, the single-minded obsession with finding a chink in Aizen's armor, it painted a picture not of a traitor, but of a spy engaged in the longest and most dangerous undercover mission in their history. Rangiku stood straight and silent as the information was displayed, her face an unreadable mask, but Naruto, standing beside her, could feel the faint tremor that ran through her. He subtly shifted his stance, his shoulder brushing against hers, a small, grounding point of contact in the vast, intimidating hall. He was playing the long game, Shunsui murmured, his expression grim. He never truly betrayed us. He betrayed his comrades, his captain, and his duty, Soi Fan countered. Though her voice lacked its usual venom, there was a grudging respect in her tone now, the acknowledgement of one operative for another's impossible sacrifice. The debate was cut short by a piercing, frantic shriek. A Jigokucho, its wings beating in a desperate, panicked rhythm, flew into the hall, circling the captain commander's head. It was a Priority 1 alert from the Department of Research and Development. Mayuri Kuretsuchi, who had been observing the proceedings with a bored, clinical detachment, suddenly grinned, his face a grotesque mask of excitement. "Oh, this is splendid," he chirped. "Captain Commander, it seems our theories are about to be tested in the most spectacular fashion." A massive holographic map of the dimensional planes appeared in the center of the room. A single, angry red blotch was pulsing violently. It was centered on a world labeled with the Shinigami designation, Sector 7C. The Elemental Nations. A Garganta, Hitsugaya breathed, his eyes wide. Of that magnitude, it's larger than the one Aizen used to invade Karakura town. It is a full-scale dimensional rift, Yamamoto stated, his voice a low growl of thunder. He is not sending a scouting party. This is an invasion. He turned, his gaze falling upon Naruto, and for the first time, the old man's eyes held not suspicion or calculation, but the clear, focused understanding of one commander to another. You're home. Naruto's blood ran cold. He didn't need to see the map. He could already feel it. A distant, terrible tearing sensation at the edge of his senses, a violation of High's world so profound it felt like a wound in his own body. He looked at Rangiku, and in her eyes, he saw the same dawning horror. This was it. The war had come to him. In the dark, barren wasteland of Hueco Mundo, Sosuke Aizen sat upon his throne in Las Noches, observing the events in the Seraite through a shimmering distortion in the air. He had seen it all. Their discovery of his lab, their understanding of his plans. Their nascent alliance with the boy who was a god in waiting. They learn quickly, he mused to the empty throne room. But they are always one step behind. He had hoped to lure Naruto into his grasp with subtlety, to study and dissect the boy's unique power at his leisure. But the Equilibrium's premature appearance and the Gote 13's interference had forced his hand. The time for scalpels was over. It was time for a hammer. He raised a hand, and a figure emerged from the shadows, kneeling before him. It was massive, even for an Arankar, its body a terrifying fusion of sleek, panther-like muscle and jagged, iron-hard hierro. Its hollow hole was a ragged, star-shaped burst in its chest, and its mask fragment was a savage, fanged jaw that covered the lower half of its face. Its eyes glowed with a feral, crimson light, and the spiritual pressure rolling off it was a suffocating wave of pure, unrestrained violence. It was Baragan Lusenbairn's raw power fused with Ulquiorra Cypher's cold efficiency. A masterpiece of artificial evolution. Sinsel, Aizen said, his voice smooth as silk. You are my newest creation. My Primera Espada. Your purpose is simple. Why? Oh, you will lead my army to the world of the Jinchuriki. You will burn his city to the ground. You will break his spirit. And you will bring him to me. Show them the true meaning of despair. The Arankar, Sinsel, bowed its head. As you command, Lord Aizen. Behind him, the shadows of Las Noches writhed, and from them emerged an army. Thousands of hollows, from the mindless Jillian-class Manos to the swift and deadly Ajukas. Their collective hunger a palpable, roaring wave. With a gesture from Aizen, a garganta tore open above them, a screaming black mouth in the perpetual twilight of Hueco Mundo. The invasion had begun. The sky above Konoha ripped open. It happened without warning. One moment, it was a peaceful afternoon, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The next, a jagged black line appeared, as if the heavens themselves were cracking like glass. The line widened, stretched, and tore, creating a vast, swirling vortex of darkness that blotted out the sun. The pressure that poured from the rift was a physical force, a malevolent wave that washed over the village, shattering windows and causing the very earth to tremble. Panic erupted in the streets. From the gaping maw of the Garganta, they came. A tide of white and black, a horde of monsters spilling into the world. Hollows of every shape and size descended upon Konoha, their shrieks a chorus of soul-deep hunger. The Obi of Konoha responded with the ingrained discipline of a warrior village. The Anbu were the first to move, a blur of black and white porcelain masks, their blades meeting the hollows, claws. Jonin teams leapt to the rooftops, unleashing a storm of fireballs, wind scythes, and lightning blasts. The ground shook as the gates of Konoha slammed shut, and Tsunade's voice, amplified by jutsu, roared across the village. All forces, to the walls, civilian evacuation, now, this is not a drill. Defend your home. But this was unlike any enemy they had ever faced. Their ninjutsu, designed to combat chakra-based opponents, was less effective against these creatures of pure spirit. A fireball jutsu that could incinerate a platoon of enemy ninja would only serve to anger a larger Ajukas. They were fighting ghosts, nightmares made solid. And for every one they cut down, 3 more took its place. The Espada, Sinsel, descended last. It landed in the center of the village square with an impact th. It cracked the stone for 50 yards in every direction. It ignored the chaos, its crimson eyes scanning the battlefield with cold, predatory arrogance. It raised a hand, and a sphere of black and red energy, a Gran Rey Cero, Formed with terrifying speed, it fired the blast not at the Hokage monument, but at the academy, the symbol of the next generation. The beam of pure annihilation tore through the air, but it never reached its target. A colossal wall of ice, carved in the shape of a lotus flower, erupted from the ground, blocking the blast. The Sero exploded against the ice, the resulting shockwave leveling the surrounding buildings. Hitsugaya Toshiro landed between the Espada and the smoking remains of his ice wall, his face a mask of cold fury. Beside him, the world dissolved into a cloud of razor-sharp ashes. Rangiku unleashed her Shikai. Behind them, the Senkaimon shimmered, and dozens of Shinigami, led by captains Byakuya Kuchiki and Kenpachi Zaraki, poured into the village. And at their head, a flash of orange and black, was Naruto. He took in the scene in a single, heart-stopping glance. His village was burning. The screams of his people filled the air. A rage so pure and so absolute it was like a physical fire ignited in his soul. Everyone, he roared, his voice amplified by his own power, cutting through the din of battle. Get the civilians out, Shinigami, with me, we're taking back my home. There was no time for strategy, no time for debate. The alliance was baptized in fire. What followed was a beautiful, terrifying symphony of violence. It was a fusion of two distinct philosophies of war. The shinobi were tacticians, using the terrain, misdirection, and teamwork. The Shinigami were powerhouses, overwhelming spiritual forces meeting the enemy head-on. Together, they were something else entirely. Kakashi Hatake flickered through a horde of hollows, his Reikiri a blade of pure lightning, while Byakuya's Senbon Sakura, 1,000 tiny, beautiful blades, shredded the monsters Kakashi's attack had stunned. Sakura Haruno, her fists glowing with green medical chakra channeled into devastating strength, shattered the ground, sending a dozen hollows flying into the air. Warikaku Madarami's Hozukimaru, a 3-section spear, smashed them to pieces. Shino Abarame's Kikaichu insect swarmed a jillion, draining its spiritual energy, while Renji Abarai's Zabumeru, a massive serpent of bone, tore the weakened creature in half. Hitsugaya engaged the Espada, Sinsel, his Bankai, Daiguren Hyarinmaru, encasing him in the form of a majestic ice dragon. They were a blur of white and black, ice and steel, their battle a localized apocalypse in the heart of the village. Naruto was everywhere at once. He created 1,000 clones, a veritable army of range and black that flooded the streets, each one a cage-level threat in its own right. Rasengans of every size and shape detonated across the battlefield, their grinding power tearing through the hollows, ranks. He worked in seamless tandem with Rangiku, her Heineka a swirling cloud of death that herded enemies into his path, their movements a familiar dance perfected over weeks of training, now turned to a lethal purpose. But the tide was not turning. The Garganta remained open, a ceaseless font of new horrors. For every 100 hollows they destroyed, another 100 poured forth. Sinsel was a beast of unimaginable power. Its Hiero so strong it was able to crack Hitsugaya's ice wings with its bare hands, forcing the young captain onto the defensive. Sinsel caught Hitsugaya in a moment of weakness, smashing him through a building and into the base of the Hokage monument. It loomed over the injured captain, its hand charging another Gran Rei Sero at point-blank range. Toshiro, Rangiku screamed, her voice raw with panic. Naruto saw it. He felt a moment of cold, perfect clarity. His clones, his Rasengans, his raw power, it wasn't enough. He was trying to put out a forest fire with a bucket of water. He needed a tidal wave. He needed to become the storm. He landed on a rooftop overlooking the battle, dismissing all of his clones, his mind falling into a state of absolute focus. He closed his eyes, drawing on the energy around him. He felt the life force of his friends, his village, the very earth beneath his feet. He drew it all in. Sage mode. The orange pigmentation flared around his eyes. But this time, he reached deeper. He didn't just reach for the energy of the world. He reached for the energy of his soul. He reached for the thrumming, incandescent power that had manifested the Crimson Hilt. The power that had silenced the Gote 13. He pulled on it, not with desperation, but with a clear, focused intent, to protect. The transformation was instantaneous and breathtaking. A pillar of pure, crimson energy erupted from him, soaring into the sky and momentarily turning the black vortex of the Garganta red. The chaotic, malevolent pressure of the hollows was instantly dwarfed by a power that was ancient, vibrant, and utterly absolute. The crimson energy solidified around him, forming a flowing, semi-transparent cloak that billowed like flames. It was not the sinister, bubbling cloak of the Kyuubi, but a clean, sharp aura of immense power. The orange of his sage mode pigmentation deepened, and the tomo markings of the Sage of Six Paths appeared on his back, etched in golden light against the crimson cloak. In his right hand, the crimson hilt materialized, feeling as familiar as his own heartbeat. This time, he did not hesitate. He poured his will into it, and a blade of pure, solidified golden ryutsu, 3 feet long and humming with unimaginable power, erupted from the guard. His Zanpakuto was born, complete and perfect. A name echoed in his soul, a truth he had always known but never understood. It was the name of the demon that had haunted him, the source of his pain and his strength. But it was not a curse. It was a title. It was his Sinsel. Its Sero, ready to fire at Hitsugaya, froze. It turned its head, its crimson eyes widening in something that looked like fear. Every hollow on the battlefield stopped, their primal hunger momentarily overridden by a primal terror. Every shinobi and shinigami stared in awe at the radiant, crimson and gold figure that now dominated the sky. Naruto opened his eyes. They were no longer just blue. They were a fusion of the toad's horizontal bar and his own pupil, glowing with a divine, golden light. He leveled his new blade at the horrified Espada, his voice calm, yet it carried across the entire village. Filled with the weight of a god. Kyuubi no Kitsune. He held the sword aloft, the golden blade shining like a captured star. He channeled his will, his desire to end the invasion, to cleanse his home, into a single command. Roar. The word was not a shout, but a deep, resonant command that shook the foundations of the world. The golden blade did not change shape. Instead, it unleashed his will. A wave, a tsunami of pure, golden spiritual energy erupted from the blade. It was not fire, not wind, not lightning. It was the raw, conceptual power of a soul made manifest. It washed over the battlefield, silent and absolute. The lesser hollows did not scream. They did not explode. They simply ceased to be. The golden light touched them, and they dissolved, their souls cleansed of their hunger and sin. Released back into the cycle. The wave passed over the shinobi and shinigami, harmless and warm, a brief, reassuring touch of immense power. In a single, silent, breathtaking instant, 90% of the invading army was gone, purified. Naruto stood in the sky, his crimson cloak billowing, his golden blade held steady. He looked down at the stunned and terrified Primera Espada, the last major threat remaining. The battle for Konoha was not over, but the power on the board had just shifted. And he was no longer just Naruto Uzumaki, the Jinchuriki. He was something new, something terrible and beautiful. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Crimson Price. The silence that followed the purifying wave was more profound than any sound. It was the silence of a held breath, of a world remade in a single, golden instant. The black, screaming maw of the Garganta wavered, destabilized by the sheer pressure Naruto had unleashed, and then collapsed in on itself with a final, silent implosion, sealing the gateway. The sky above Konoha, once torn and bleeding, was a serene, bruised twilight blue again. The fires still burned, the screams of the wounded still echoed from the rubble, but the tide of monsters was gone. Vanquished, purified, all eyes, mortal and spiritual, turned to the figure still radiating a soft, crimson light in the sky. Naruto Uzumaki, or the being he had become, floated with his golden blade held at his side. He looked down, his gaze sweeping over his ravaged home, his friends, shinobi and shinigami, staring up at him with expressions of profound, unadulterated awe. He saw Rangiku, her hand over her mouth, her ice-blue eyes wide with a storm of emotions he couldn't begin to decipher. His gaze finally settled on the last remaining enemy. The Primera Espada, Sinsel. The creature was on one knee, its massive frame trembling, not from injury, but from an instinctual terror it had never known. It was a being forged for ultimate violence, a pinnacle of Aizen's craft, and it was utterly, hopelessly outclassed. Naruto descended, not with a flash of speed, but with a slow, deliberate grace, landing softly on the cracked paving stones of the village square before his foe. He was no longer a brawler, a whirlwind of chaotic energy. He was an executioner, his every movement precise and imbued with a terrifying, serene purpose. "You are a prisoner of your own rage," Naruto said, his voice a calm, resonant baritone. It was not his own voice, not entirely. It was his, but layered with an ancient, timeless quality, as if the soul of the world itself were speaking through him. "Aizen gave you power, but he bound you in hatred. That is no way to exist." Sinsel snarled, forcing itself to its feet. "The weak are fodder for the strong. Lord Aizen taught me this. I am the strong. I am his Primera." It lunged, its claws extended, a final, desperate act of defiance. Naruto didn't move to dodge or block. He simply raised his free hand. The air before solidified into an invisible wall of pure will, and the espada slammed into it with a sickening crunch of bone and hierro. The creature was held fast, suspended a foot from Naruto's face, struggling impotently against a force it could not see or comprehend. "No," Naruto said, his golden eyes filled with a strange, profound pity. "You are a lost soul. And it is time for you to go home." He touché the tip of his golden blade to the ragged, star-shaped hollow hole in Sinsel's chest. He didn't thrust. He simply made contact. A gentle, golden light bloomed from the point of contact, spreading rough the Arankar's body like ink in water. Sinsel's struggles ceased. Its crimson eyes widened, the feral rage within them slowly dissolving, replaced by a dawning, shocked understanding. The jagged, bone mask began to crack and flake away, revealing the face of a man beneath, a face etched with centuries of pain and confusion. "I remember," the soul whispered, its voice no longer a monstrous rasp. The black markings on its body faded, the iron-hard skin softened, and its monstrous form dissolved in a cascade of gentle, golden particles. The last thing to fade was the man's face, an expression of peaceful release upon it. The soul was free. The moment the purification was complete, the power within Naruto wavered. The golden blade flickered and vanished, leaving the crimson hilt in his hand for a half-second longer before it, too, dematerialized. The brilliant, crimson cloak of energy sputtered like a dying flame, and the divine light faded from his eyes, leaving them their familiar, vibrant blue. He staggered, a sharp gasp escaping his lips as a wave of exhaustion so profound it was like a physical blow washed over him. His body felt like lead, his every muscle screaming in protest. He had touched the sun, and the price was a terrible, consuming fire. He fell, his knees buckled, and the world tilted into a dizzying blur. He never hit the ground. Rangiku was there, moving with a speed born of pure desperation. She caught him, her arms wrapping around his chest, taking his weight as he slumped against her. "Naruto," she cried out, her voice sharp with alarm. He was alarmingly heavy, his body dense with the lingering traces of that immense power. "I'm okay," he mumbled, his head resting against her shoulder. The scent of her sake and sunflowers was a grounding anchor in the dizzying sea of his fatigue. "Just need a minute. That form, it takes a lot out of me." Around them, the world came rushing back. The spell of awe was broken, replaced by the grim reality of the battle's aftermath. Shouts for medics, the cries of the wounded, the coordinated orders of shinobi and shinigami alike as they began to secure the village and tend to their own. Hitsugaya, bruised and battered but alive, barked orders to his squad. Kakashi flickered to Naruto's side, his visible eye filled with a deep, paternal concern. "What was that?" Kakashi asked, his voice low, meant only for them. "A solution," Naruto breathed, his strength slowly beginning to return. "And a problem." Suddenly, it happened. A feeling, or rather, the absence of one. The vibrant thrum of chakra that was the lifeblood of Konoha. The buzzing spiritual energy of the assembled Shinigami, the natural energy in the very air, it all just stopped. It was as if someone had thrown a switch, and the power that defined their world had been turned off. A great and terrible silence fell, not of sound, but of energy. A zone of silence, vast and absolute, descended upon the entire village like a glass dome. Why shinobi in Konoha who was channeling chakra for a jutsu, be it for healing or repair, crumpled as their connection was severed. Their life force was still there, but their ability to access their power was gone. The Shinigami fared worse. Their Ryutsu, the very substance of their being, was suppressed, smothered. Rangiku gasped, feeling as if she were suddenly trying to breathe underwater. The connection to Hinata became a faint, distant whisper. She felt weak, mortal. All around them, captains and lieutenants, heroes and legends, stumbled and fell to their knees, their spiritual pressure guttering out like snuffed candles. Only those with the most immense reserves, like Byakuya and Kenpachi, remained standing, and even they were pale, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Their power reduced to a fraction of its true strength. They were not alone. Standing amidst the rubble, as if they had been there all along, were 5 figures. They were clad in the same sterile white suits, their faces hidden by the same featureless porcelain masks as the assassin who had attacked Naruto in the forest. At their head stood one who was different. He wore the same uniform, but his mask was a stark, glossy black. And he did not exude the same nullifying aura. Instead, he radiated a power that was terrifying in its purity and control. It was the Ryutsu of a Shinigami, ancient, vast, and honed to a razor's edge. He carried a simple, unadorned katana at his waist. Naruto pushed himself off Rangiku, forcing his exhausted body to stand. The nullifying field was pressing on him, a crushing weight. But the power of his soul, the energy that was neither chakra nor Ryutsu, pushed back. He was weakened, drained, but not powerless. The core of him remained untouched. The equilibrium, he snarled, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. So you remember us, the figure with the black mask said. His voice was not synthesized. It was deep, calm, and resonant with an authority that seemed to eclipse even Yamamoto's. It was the voice of a man who had not known doubt in centuries. We came to assess an anomaly. We find, instead, a nascent god holding a weapon of cosmic significance. He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping over the powerless Shinigami and the struggling shinobi. We exist to prevent this. Great power is a cancer. It grows, it consumes, and it inevitably leads to ruin. The Soul King, Aizen. The Quincy King, they are all symptoms of the same disease. The disease of transcendence. He stopped, his masked face fixing on Naruto. You, boy, are the ultimate expression of that disease. Your very existence threatens to unravel the ordained structure of reality. The price for your power is a price the universe cannot be allowed to pay. The leader drew his blade. The steel seemed to drink the light, ancient and utterly perfect. We are the cure, the purge, the correction. We will excise you from existence, and the worlds will return to balance. Like hell you will, a voice drawled. Kakashi stepped forward, a simple kunai in his hand. His chakra was gone, his Sharingan useless, but his will was unbroken. He stood between the equilibrium's leader and his student. If you want him, you have to go through us. The leader tilted his head. You were once a great warrior, Kakashi Hatake. Now, you are just a man. Your sacrifice is meaningless. He moved. He didn't use shunpo. He simply flowed, covering the distance between them with an impossible, liquid grace. Kakashi's eyes widened, unable to track the movement. The leader's blade flashed, a simple, elegant arc. It was not aimed to kill. The blade struck Kakashi's side, and a burst of complex, white energy, like Aikido, flared at the point of impact. Kakashi cried out, not just in pain, but in shock. As the energy coursed through him, he collapsed, his body convulsing, his connection to the very world seeming to fray. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto screamed, a wave of pure, unadulterated fury washing away his exhaustion. He charged, drawing not on his new power, but on raw, physical strength and rage. The 4 white masked agents moved to intercept him, their movements perfectly synchronized. But before they could reach him, a gray cloud of ash swirled around them, impossibly, in the nullifying field. Rangiku, her face a mask of pure, desperate fury, had forced her Shikai through sheer willpower. A feat that should have been impossible. The ash was thin, weak, but it was enough to momentarily obscure their vision. The moment was all Naruto needed. He broke through their line and charged the leader. The man met his furious assault with an infuriating calm, his blade a blur, parrying Naruto's wild punches and kicks, his skill so profound it seemed to border on precognition. Your rage makes you strong, the leader said calmly, deflecting a powerful kick aimed at his head. But it also makes you predictable. He found an opening, a momentary lapse in Naruto's frenzied attack, and thrust his palm forward. The same geometric symbol that had disabled Naruto before glowing on his hand. Dispel. The symbol slammed into Naruto's chest. The last dregs of his power, the embers of his soul's fire, were smothered. He gasped, the strength leaving his limbs, and the leader's follow-up kick sent him crashing to the ground beside the fallen Kakashi. He was pinned. Defeated. Rangiku's Shikai dissolved. The effort too great, and the four agents surrounded her, their impassive masks turning to watch the final act. The leader stood over Naruto, his blade raised. It is done. The correction will be made. Naruto looked up, past the gleaming sword, past the black, featureless mask, and his eyes found Rangiku's. She was held at bay, her face a canvas of desperation and terror, her hand outstretched towards him. In that moment, with death a certainty and all hope lost, the world narrowed to the space between them. There were no more secrets, no more witty deflections, no more walls. There was only the raw, undeniable truth. Rangiku, he breathed, his voice a ragged whisper. If we get out of this, I know, she choked out, a single tear cutting a path through the grime on her cheek. Me too. Her voice grew stronger, a fierce, desperate promise. We will, Naruto. We will get out of this. I'm not losing you, too. Her words, her promise, were not fuel for his rage. They were an anchor, a focal point in the storm of his despair. It wasn't about being the strongest anymore. It wasn't about saving the world. It was about surviving, for her. For the chance to say, her smile again without the weight of the past in her eyes. It was the simplest, and most powerful, motivation in the universe. The leader brought his sword down. A flicker of crimson light pulsed from Naruto's chest. It was not an explosion of power. It was a single, defiant heartbeat of his soul. It pushed back against the leader's dispel technique, a tiny spark of resistance. The leader's blade stopped, an inch from Naruto's throat. He looked down, a flicker of what might have been surprise in the tilt of his head. What is this? Your power was nullified. Naruto gritted his teeth, his entire being focused on that single spark. That promise to Rangiku, he pushed, not with his muscles, but with his will. The crimson light pulsed again, stronger this time. It wasn't the overwhelming power of his new form. It was something deeper, more concentrated. The raw, indomitable will to live, to protect, to love. The dispel technique on his chest began to crackle, the white light flickering against the encroaching crimson. Interesting, the leader mused, withdrawing his blade slightly. He looked from Naruto's straining face to Rangiku's desperate one. The power of emotional connection. A variable, an impurity. He raised his sword again, but this time, he hesitated. You have earned a moment's reprieve, anomaly. Show me how the bonds of sentimentality can stand against the cold, perfect logic of universal order. Quote, he didn't attack. He stood there, watching, waiting. The execution was paused. A temporary, terrifying stalemate had been reached, balanced on the knife's edge of Naruto's will. Held together by a single, desperate promise made in the face of oblivion. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Original Sin. The world was balanced on the edge of a sword. An inch from Naruto's throat. The leader of the Equilibrium's blade was held in place not by a clash of steel, but by a battle of pure, conceptual force. The leader's dispel technique, a power of absolute nullification, was being held at bay by a single, defiant spark of crimson light pulsing from Naruto's chest. It was a dying star pushing back against the cold vacuum of space, fueled by a single, desperate promise whispered to the woman he loved. Remarkable, the leader of the Equilibrium mused, his voice a calm, clinical monotone that was somehow more terrifying than any shout. He watched the crimson light flicker, strengthening with every ragged breath Naruto took. You are actively generating a soul-based energy field under a total suppression effect. The catalyst appears to be an extreme emotional response linked to subject beta. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a complex piece of music. Your will is rewriting the rules of our engagement. Fascinating. This wasn't a fight, it was a vivisection. Naruto was an anomaly on a lab table, and his defiance was merely a new, unexpected variable to be recorded before termination. He had to move. He had to create an opening. Focus, Kit. Kurama's voice rumbled through his mind. It was not the usual bellow of rage, but a low, steady growl, like the grinding of tectonic plates. The fox was also weakened by the zone of silence, his connection to Naruto's chakra network severed, but his will, his very essence as a being of pure energy and hatred, remained. That power, the crimson light, it is not mine. It is not the chakra of your world. It is the core of you. Stop trying to fight him with your fists. Fight him with your soul. Fight him with his soul. What did that even mean? He looked at Rangiku, held at bay by the 4 white-clad agents. Her face a portrait of desperate, defiant hope. Her belief in him was a tangible thing, a lifeline in the suffocating darkness. That was the source, his connection to her, his refusal to let her watch him die. He stopped pushing back with brute force. He stopped trying to overpower the dispel technique. Instead, he focused his entire being on that connection. He let the image of her face, the sound of her voice, the memory of her hand in his, fill his entire existence. The crimson spark in his chest did not explode. It condensed. It became smaller, denser, hotter, until it was a single perfect point of incandescent resolve. The geometric symbol of the dispel technique on his chest began to overload. It crackled, white light sputtering as it failed to process the unique, emotionally charged energy signature Naruto was emitting. It was like trying to contain a paradox. The cold logic of the nullification field could not compute the chaotic, illogical power of a soul fighting for another. With a sound like shattering crystal, the symbol on the leader's hand fractured. A feedback loop of crimson energy shot up his arm, causing the leader to grunt in surprise and take a single, involuntary step back. The zone of silence flickered. For a single, priceless second, the oppressive, energy-dampening field wavered. It was not a collapse, merely a stutter, but it was enough. Now, a voice roared. It was Shunsui Kyoraku. Though weakened, the veteran captain had been waiting, observing, looking for precisely this kind of opening. In that instant, the world became a blur of motion. Shikamaru Nara, who had been playing dead near his father, shot his hand out. His shadow, faint and thin but usable for a fraction of a second, lashed out and wrapped around the legs of the equilibrium agents holding Rangiku, momentarily binding them. It was a move that cost him nearly all of his remaining strength. Byakuya Kuchiki, his face a mask of grim determination, used the flick cur of restored power to manifest a single storm of Senbon Sakura petals, not to attack, but to create a swirling pink smokescreen around the leaders. Kenpachi Zaraki, with a guttural roar, unleashed a single explosive burst of his immense Ryutsu, a crude but effective concussive blast that shook the entire square. It was a perfectly coordinated, instinctual retreat. Rangiku, freed for a moment, rushed to Naruto, hauling him to his feet. Hitsugaya grabbed the unconscious form of Kakashi. This way, Tsunade yelled, pointing towards the dense, ancient forests bordering the village. To the Nara compound, they fled, a strange, desperate exodus of the most powerful beings from 2 worlds, running for their lives. The equilibrium leader stood impassively amidst the chaos, watching them go. Oh, nay of his white-clad subordinates moved to pursue, but he held up a hand. Let them run, the leader commanded. His gaze was fixed on the spot where Naruto had been, where a faint, crimson afterimage of his energy still lingered in the air. The experiment is complete. The variable has been confirmed. Emotional attachment creates a paradoxical energy that can disrupt soul suppression fields. He looked down at his hand, where the dispel symbol was slowly repairing itself. The subject is more complex than we anticipated. The correction will require a more surgical approach. He made no move to follow. The hunt was over. The dissection would come later. The air in the Nara clan's ancestral forest was thick with the scent of pine and ancient secrets. It was a place shielded by generations of powerful, complex fuinjutsu. A sanctuary hidden within the heart of the village. Here, in a secluded clearing, the remnants of their forces gathered. The mood was a grim tapestry of shock, defeat, and a creeping, gnawing fear. Kakashi lay on a hastily prepared bed of moss, his breathing shallow. Sakura and Tsunade worked over him, their faces etched with frustration. Their medical ninjutsu was useless, his chakra coils were intact. But his very life force seemed to be unraveling, a slow, steady decay caused by the equilibrium leader's strange attack. The Shinigami were in a similar state of shock. They had been stripped of their power, reduced to mere mortals by an enemy they couldn't comprehend. The experience had shaken the very foundations of their pride and identity. They were gods brought low, and the memory of their helplessness was a bitter poison. Naruto sat with his back against a great, ancient tree, Rangiku beside him. The exhaustion was a physical ache that went bone deep, but it was the mental and emotional toll that was truly crushing. He had touched a new height of power, only to be utterly dismantled moments later. He had saved his village, only to watch his mentor be cut down before his eyes. Urahara Kazuki knelt beside Kakashi, his usual lazy demeanor completely gone. He held a small, intricate device over the wound, its lens glowing with a soft blue light. After a long moment, he stood up, his expression graver than anyone had ever seen it. "This is not a curse, nor a poison," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's an unwriting. The technique is Sai, schematically deconstructing the spiritual syntax of his soul. It's erasing him from existence, molecule by molecule." He looked at Naruto. "The zone of silence, this technique, it isn't Kido. It isn't jutsu. It's something far more fundamental. It's a technology, or an art, based on the absolute laws of spiritual physics. It was designed by someone who understood the very building blocks of a soul." "But I fought it," Naruto said, his voice raw. "For a second, I pushed it back." "Precisely," Urahara said, his hidden eyes fixing on Naruto with an unnerving intensity. "And that is the key. Your chakra was gone, your Shinigami power was suppressed. Everything that makes you a powerhouse was stripped away, and you still resisted. The only thing left was the core of you, your lineage, your nature." He crouched down in front of Naruto. "The world thinks the Uzumaki were just distant cousins of the Senju, masters of sealing jutsu. I've always suspected there was more to the story. The sheer density of your soul, your natural affinity for spiritual energy even before your powers manifested, it's not normal. To defeat this enemy, to save Kakashi, you have to understand what you are." Urahara's words struck a chord deep within him. He was a hybrid, an anomaly. He had always known it. But what were the pieces? A shinobi father, a Jinchuriki mother, and something else. The crimson hilt, the golden blade, a power that answered to his soul's deepest cry. He needed answers. Not from a shinobi, not from a Shinigami. He needed them from an Uzumaki. He closed his eyes, shutting out the worried faces around him. He turned his senses inward, past the roaring, silent presence of Kurama, past the complex architecture of the fourth Hokage's seal. He reached deeper into himself than he ever had before, searching for a clue. A remnant, a ghost of his heritage. He focused on the memory of his mother's red hair, of her fierce love, a story told to him by his father's spirit. He called out to her in the silent depths of his own soul. "Mom." The world dissolved. The sounds of the forest faded. He was no longer in the clearing. He was in a vast, warm, sunlit space. It was not the familiar, dark sewer of his mindscape. This place was different. It was a sprawling, ancient library, the shelves carved from some warm, living wood, stretching up into an infinite, golden haze. And standing in the center of it all, her back to him, was a woman with long, impossibly vibrant red hair. She turned, and her face was just as he had seen it once before. Kushina Uzumaki. But this was not a mere echo of chakra. This was a true spiritual remnant, a guardian of a legacy, left as a final gift for her son. "You finally came," she said, her voice warm and filled with a love that was both fierce and gentle. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever look deep enough, you know." "Mom," he breathed, tears welling in his eyes. She smiled, a sad, proud smile. "There's no time for a proper reunion, my sweet boy. You're in terrible danger. The world is. You need to know the truth." She gestured to the infinite library around them. "This is the truth of our clan. The Uzumaki." She raised a hand, and a book flew into it. She opened it, and the images within it flowed out, becoming living projections around them. "We were not originally from this land," she began, her voice taking on the tone of a historian, a keeper of sacred lore. "Our story begins in the Soul Society, in the era of its founding." The image shifted, showing the Seraite in a much rawer, more violent state. "We were a clan of Shinigami, renowned for two things: our immense spiritual energy, our chakra, as we came to call it, and our mastery of Kido. We saw it not as a weapon, but as a sacred art. A way to write the laws of the universe. We called it Fuinjutsu. The scene changed again, showing a radiant, godlike being of immense light, the Soul King, doing battle with a creature of pure, roiling chaos. It was a formless, endless storm of creation and destruction. Before the three worlds were separated, there was only a sea of potential, Kushina explained. And in that sea, two great consciousnesses existed. Order and chaos. The Soul King was the avatar of order. He sought to create structure, to give form to the formless. His greatest adversary was a being of pure, untamed creation. Not evil, not good. Simply, chaos. The projection showed the Soul King victorious, but unable to destroy his counterpart. Instead, he shattered it. A massive explosion of energy, from which the Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and the world of the living were born. He used the body of his defeated foe to create the raw materials for his new cosmos, she said, her voice filled with a profound, ancient sadness. But a fragment of its consciousness, its rage and its power, remained. A being of pure, apocalyptic energy. Your world knows it as the Kyuubi no Yoko. Naruto stared, his mind reeling. Kurama was the remnant of a god. Our clan, the Uzumaki, saw the Soul King's new world as a prison, Kushina continued. He had sacrificed true freedom for a manufactured, sterile peace. We believed that chaos was a necessary part of life, that it drove change and growth. To seal it away completely was a sin. So, when he ordered the fragment of chaos to be destroyed, we defied him. The projection showed figures with the Uzumaki clan's spiral crest. Their red hair like banners of defiance, standing before a roaring, nine-tailed fox of impossible size. We fled the Soul Society. We took the heart of the Chaos God with us, and we came to this world. We became its guardians, not its jailers. We used our Fuinjutsu, the art of writing laws, to create a vessel, a Jinchuriki, that could house its immense power, to allow it to coexist with the world rather than be erased by the Soul King's obsession with order. We dedicated our lives to soothing its rage, to understanding its chaotic nature. She turned to him, her violet eyes boring into his. The act of shattering that God and imposing a rigid, artificial order upon the universe, that is the original sin. And the equilibrium, they were created to be its guardians. The final projection showed the Soul King with a figure by his side, a being shrouded in white light. He was the Soul King's chief architect, the scientist and philosopher who designed the New World Order. He believed so fiercely in his king's vision that he created a secret society, a group of zealous enforcers to act as a fail-safe. Their sole purpose, to eliminate any being or power that could threaten to undo the original sin. To reintroduce true, untamed chaos into the king's perfect system. They are the surgeons of the status quo. The pieces clicked into place in Naruto's mind with the force of a physical blow. The equilibrium's talk of imbalance and correction. Their ability to nullify energy. Their leader's cold, absolute logic. They weren't just fanatics. They were the ultimate conservatives. The guardians of a cosmic cage. And he was the ultimate heresy. A child of the Uzumaki, a Shinigami bloodline that champions chaos, Kushina said, her voice soft but filled with a steely pride. And the vessel of the very god they seek to suppress. You are not a hybrid of two powers, Naruto. You are the living, breathing fusion of the two philosophies that have been at war since the dawn of time. You are the proof that order and chaos can coexist. That they can love, and create something new. She placed a warm, spectral hand on his cheek. Your Zanpakuto, your connection to that girl, it is not a flaw. It is your purpose. It is the chaos of your emotions giving form to the order of your soul. You are the god of a new era, my son. An era the equilibrium will do anything to prevent. The library began to fade. The golden light dimming. I cannot help you fight this battle, Kushina whispered, her form growing translucent. This was just a message in a bottle. A story. But now you know the truth. Now you know what you are fighting for. Naruto awoke with a gasp, his back still against the ancient tree in the Nara forest. The faces of his friends, of Rangiku, swam into his vision. The weight of his new knowledge settled upon him, a burden and a banner. He now understood the true stakes. This was not a war for his village, or for the Soul Society. It was a war for the soul of the universe itself. He looked at Rangiku, her face wrought with worry for him. He saw not a variable, not an impurity, but the beautiful, chaotic, unpredictable heart of the world he was fighting to protect. He finally had his answer for the man in the black mask. He pushed himself to his feet, his body still aching, but his eyes clear and burning with a resolve that was absolute. "I know what we have to do," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable clarity. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Devil's Bargain. "I know what we have to do," Naruto's voice cut through the grim silence of the Nara forest. Every head turned towards him. He stood tall, the crushing exhaustion of his earlier battle pushed aside by a new, terrifying clarity. The weight of his mother's story, the truth of his own existence, had settled onto his shoulders, and he wore it not as a burden, but as a mantle of command. He looked at the assembled faces, shinobi, Shinigami, legends from two worlds, all of them battered, powerless, and afraid. He was their only hope, and he knew it. The equilibrium. "They're not just trying to kill me," he began, his voice steady and strong. "They're trying to correct the universe. They serve the original order established by the Soul King. An order that was created when he shattered a god of chaos to build the three worlds." He paused, letting the impossible words sink in. "Kurama. The Kyuubi. He is the last, largest fragment of that god." A wave of stunned disbelief washed over the clearing. The Shinigami stared at him, their understanding of Biju, of Jinchuriki, of the very cosmology of their world, shattering and reforming in an instant. "My clan, the Uzumaki," Naruto continued, his gaze finding Rangiku's, a silent message passing between them. "Were Shinigami who believed that act was a sin. They fled the Soul Society and became the guardians of that fragment, believing that order and chaos were meant to coexist. I am the result of that belief, a descendant of their bloodline, and the vessel for the very power the equilibrium was created to erase." Urahara Kazuki snapped his fan shut. "The original sin," he breathed, his mind racing, Nnecting 1,000 disparate points of obscure history. Of course, a failsafe, built by the Soul King's architect to protect his perfect, sterile system from ever being challenged. It all makes sense. Their technology, their ideology, it's the logic of a creator trying to debug his own creation. "Their leader said they were a cure," Naruto affirmed, his eyes hardening. "And they have a weapon to administer it. I don't know what it is, but their goal isn't just me. It's to purge anyone and anything that represents a threat to their perfect order. That includes every one of you." He looked at Tsunade, at the powerless captains. "And it especially includes the Soul King himself." The implication was a seismic shock. The Gote 13, for all its power and pride, existed for a single purpose, protect the Soul King and the balance he maintained. They were now facing an enemy whose ultimate goal was the deicide of their god, an enemy born from the will of that very same god. It was a paradox that left them speechless. Before anyone could process the sheer scale of the crisis, the air itself tore open. It was not the ragged, chaotic blackness of a hollow's garganta. This was a clean, sharp rip in the fabric of space. A perfect, vertical slit of darkness that hummed with a power that was both familiar and utterly dreaded. From the slit, a single figure stepped out. He wore a simple white hakama, his gentle, scholarly face graced with a serene, knowing smile. His brown hair fell across his brow, and his very presence radiated an intellectual and spiritual pressure that was second only to Yamamoto himself. Sosuke Aizen had arrived. Instantly, every Shinigami capable of standing was on their feet, what little Ryutsu they could muster crackling with hostile intent. Hitsugaya's hand flew to Hiranmaru, a snarl of pure hatred on his face. Byakuya's stoic calm was replaced by a murderous intensity. Aizen paid them no mind. He simply surveyed the scene, his gaze taking in the wounded Kakashi, the powerless captains, and finally settling on Naruto. My, he said, his voice as smooth and pleasant as a summer breeze. "It seems you've all had a rather difficult day." "Aizen," Hitsugaya roared, taking a step forward. "What are you doing here?" "The same thing you are, Captain Hitsugaya," Aizen replied, his smile never wavering. "I am trying to prevent the end of the world as we know it." He gestured lazily at the sky. "This equilibrium, their ambition is truly breathtaking. To reset the universe to its factory settings. A noble, if unimaginative, goal. Unfortunately for them, it conflicts rather directly with my own plans for the future. He looked at Naruto again. You see, one cannot ascend to the throne of heaven if there is no heaven left to claim. Their weapon, the one they intend to use to correct you and then the Soul King, would erase the very source of power I seek to control. The pieces fell into place with a horrifying click. Aizen's entire life's work, his betrayal, his creation of the Urankar, was all aimed at one goal, to kill the Soul King and take his place. The Equilibrium, in their quest to preserve the King's order by destroying him, were Aizen's direct competitors. An enemy of my enemy, Shunsui Kyoraku murmured, his one visible eye narrowed, his mind already 5 steps ahead of everyone else. Precisely, Captain Kyoraku, Aizen beamed. I find myself in the unusual position of needing the Gote 13 to exist for a little while longer. And you find yourselves in the even more unusual position of needing my help. He spread his hands in a gesture of magnanimous offering. I propose a temporary cessation of hostilities. A joint venture, if you will. We work together to eliminate this existential threat. Once they are dealt with, we can all return to the far more entertaining business of trying to kill one another. What do you say? The offer was poison. It was a deal with the devil himself, a betrayal of everything they stood for. But as they looked at their wounded, at their severed connection to their own power, they knew it was an offer they couldn't refuse. They were broken, and Aizen was at his full strength. We have no choice, Yukitake said, his voice heavy with resignation. We would rather die with honor. Soi Fan spat, but her words lacked conviction. Before the debate could begin, the world shook. A new portal ripped open. This one ragged and wild, spitting out a figure who landed in a crouch in the center of the clearing. He was a teenager with vibrant orange hair, clad in a black shihakusho, a massive cleaver-like zanpakuto strapped to his back. Ichigo Kurosaki stood up, his eyes wide, taking in the impossible scene. He saw the battered captains, Urahara, a blonde kid in a tattered orange jumpsuit who radiated an insane amount of power, and his mortal enemy, Sosuke Aizen, standing amongst them as if he belonged there. What the hell is going on? Ichigo demanded, his hand already gripping the hilt of Zangetsu. The explanation given to Ichigo was a rushed, frantic summary of an impossible situation. He didn't understand half of it. Chaos gods, ancient Shinigami clans, soul erasing fanatics, but he understood the core of it. A powerful new enemy had appeared, they had hurt his friends, and Aizen was, for some insane reason, on their side for the moment. For Ichigo, the tactical and moral complexities were irrelevant. There was a threat, and he would cut it down. His acceptance was a simple, determined nod. The alliance was formed, a grotesque and desperate coalition of the Gote 13, 2 worldly protectors, and the greatest traitor in the history of the Soul Society. They did not have to wait long for the confrontation. As if sensing their decision, the leader of the Equilibrium made his presence known. His calm, resonant voice echoed through the forest, seeming to come from everywhere at once. The Council of Broken Gods and Misguided Children has reached a conclusion, I see. You have chosen to ally with a cancer to fight a cure. It is a predictable, emotional, and ultimately futile decision. The trees around the clearing began to shimmer and dissolve, not into dust, but into pure, white light. The Fuinjutsu of the Nara clan was being unwritten. The forest melted away, revealing the devastated landscape of Konoha under a bruised, twilight sky. Standing in the center of the village square was the Equilibrium's leader, his 4 white-clad agents flanking him like statues. In the leader's hand was a new object. It was a perfect, white sphere, about the size of a fist. That seemed to absorb all light and sound around it. It exuded a profound and terrible silence. This is the axiom of nullity, the leader announced, his voice echoing in their minds. An ARTI fact crafted from a tear in the fabric of the original sin. It does not destroy, it resets. It will return all anomalous spiritual signatures within its sphere of influence to a state of pure, untethered soul energy. It will erase your identities, your powers, your very histories. You will simply cease to have been. He held it aloft. I will give you this one chance to surrender your anomaly, he said. His unseen gaze fixing on Naruto. Give us the boy, and I will grant the rest of you a swift, painless correction. Not a chance in hell, Ichigo snarled, drawing Zangetsu. Naruto stepped forward, his eyes burning with a cold, controlled fire. You talk about order. But a world without the freedom to feel, to love, to make mistakes, that's not order. It's a cage, and we're going to tear it down. The leader let out a sound that might have been a sigh. So be it. The battle began not with a charge, but with a silent, coordinated assault. Aizen was the first to move. He raised a finger, his voice a quiet murmur. Hado number 90, Kurohitsugi. A massive black coffin of spiritual energy erupted around one of the white masked agents. But before the gravity warping spears could form, the agent simply placed its hand on the wall of the Kido. The geometric dispel symbol glowed, and the entire black coffin, a spell that could warp space and time, dissolved into nothingness. Their nullification fields are active, Aizen noted with academic curiosity. Standard energy attacks will be useless. Then we use something they can't nullify. Kenpachi Zaraki roared, a bloodthirsty, joyous grin splitting his face. He exploded forward, a blur of raw physical power, his jagged blade aimed at the same agent. This was the signal. The unholy alliance charged. The four white agents moved to intercept them, leaving their leader to stand guard over the axiom of nullity. The battle fractured into a series of desperate, strategic duels. Kenpachi's wild, overwhelming assault was met by an agent who moved with a calm, fluid precision. It didn't try to block Kenpachi's monstrous blows. It simply wasn't there, redirecting his momentum, using his own force against him. It was a dance of pure chaos versus perfect order. Byakuya Kuchiki joined the fray, his Senbon Sakura useless, relying on his pure, masterful Zanjutsu. The two rivals, one a berserker and the other a surgeon, were forced into a reluctant, deadly ballet. Trying to pin down a single, perfect opponent who seemed to be in three places at once. Shunsui and Yukitaki, the oldest and most experienced of the captains, engaged another agent. Their Shikai abilities were suppressed, forcing them to rely on centuries of battlefield experience and raw sword skill. They moved in perfect concert, a flowing, two-pronged attack of feints and thrusts. A testament to their unbreakable bond. Just like old times, Jashiro. Shunsui remarked, narrowly dodging a disarming strike. Except this time, our opponent seems to have read all the books on how to beat us. Hitsugaya and Rangiku, fighting side by side, led a third group against another agent. This was personal. They fought with a desperate fury, trying to overcome the power that had so easily defeated them before. Hitsugaya used his superior speed, while Rangiku, her Shikai unusable, wielded her heavy blade with a fierce, powerful grace. It was a battle of attrition, a sheer contest of will against a tireless, perfect machine. Aizen, to everyone's surprise, confronted the fourth agent alone. He did not use Kido. He simply drew his blade, a faint, amused smile on his face. The fight was a blur of steel, a masterclass in swordsmanship so advanced it was almost incomprehensible. Aizen was a prodigy of a different order, his skill absolute. But even he could not land a decisive blow. His opponent was his perfect mirror, flawless, precise, and utterly without passion. While the captains engaged the honor guard, Naruto and Ichigo raced towards the main threat, the leader in the axiom of nullity. What's the plan? Ichigo yelled over the din of battle. You hit him high, I'll hit him low. Naruto yelled back, a classic, simple strategy. Ichigo leapt into the air, Zangetsu raised high, glowing with a black, crackling spiritual energy. Getsuga. Tensho. A massive wave of black energy screamed towards the leader. At the same moment, Naruto, moving low to the ground, formed a Rasengan, pouring his wind-natured chakra into it. Wind style. Rasenshuriken. The two ultimate attacks, one from a Shinigami, one from a shinobi, converged on their target. The leader did not move. He simply raised his free hand. An invisible wall of force, a localized, intensified zone of silence, shimmered into existence before him. The Getsuga Tensho struck it first, the black energy dissolving, unwritten from existence. The Rasenshuriken hit a fraction of a second later, its millions of microscopic wind blades grinding against the field, the shrieking sound of their rota. Tion, the only thing that persisted for a moment before it, too, was annihilated. Your powers are impressive, the leader stated calmly as the two boys landed, breathing heavily. They are the reason you must be erased. He moved, his speed breathtaking. He engaged them both at once, his simple katana a blur, parrying Zangetsu's heavy cleaving blows and Naruto's unpredictable taijutsu with an ease that was insulting. He fought with a style that was the platonic ideal of swordsmanship. No wasted motion, no openings, every block a potential counter, every step a strategic repositioning. He's too good, Ichigo grunted, forced back. It's like he knows what I'm going to do before I do. He's not predicting us, Naruto realized, his sage mode senses struggling to keep up. He's just perfect. There's no ego in his fighting. No anger, no joy, just logic. While they fought, the axiom of nullity in the leader's other hand began to pulse with a soft, white light. A low hum filled the air, a sound that was felt more than heard. A vibration that seemed to loosen the bonds of reality itself. He's activating it, Urahara yelled from the sidelines where he was coordinating the non-combatants. And trying to analyze the enemy's power. It's gathering ambient spiritual energy. Once it reaches critical mass, it will discharge a wave of absolute erasure. You have to stop him now. The pressure intensified. On one side of the battlefield, Kenpachi, in a fit of desperate rage, tore off his eye patch. A volcano of spiritual pressure erupted from him, so immense that it momentarily warped the localized zone of silence around his opponent. The agent staggered, its perfect defense broken for a fraction of a second. It was the opening Byakuya needed. He sheathed his sword and whispered, Senka, appearing behind the agent. His blade having already passed through its soul sleep and Sakatsu, severing the agent's spiritual pathways. The agent froze, then dissolved into white particles. One down. But the victory was costly. Kenpachi was panting, having expended a massive amount of energy, and Byakuya was drained. Seeing his comrade fall, the leader of the equilibrium seemed to make a decision. The pulsing of the axiom quickened. We need to end this now. Naruto yelled to Ichigo, everything you've got. One big attack. Ichigo nodded, his face set in a grim mask. He donned his hollow mask. The black and red markings spreading across his face, his spiritual pressure skyrocketing. Naruto entered sage mode, the orange pigmentation flaring around his eyes. He created a single clone. Let's try something new, Naruto said to Ichigo. Ichigo raised Zangetsu, pouring all of his power into one final, ultimate Getsuga. Naruto and his clone began to form a Rasenshuriken, but this time, he poured more than just wind chakra into it. He focused, drawing on the nascent, soul-based power within him, the crimson energy that was his birthright. The shrieking shuriken of wind began to glow, a core of brilliant golden light forming at its center. Now, Ichigo, aim for the Rasengan. Ichigo didn't question it. He unleashed his attack, not at the leader, but at the technique forming between Naruto's hands. The black energy of the Getsuga Tensho did not collide with the Rasenshuriken, it was drawn into it, absorbed by the golden core. The resulting weapon was a monstrosity of power, a spinning shuriken of violent wind. Its edges crackling with black lightning, its core a churning vortex of gold and black, a perfect, terrible fusion of their souls. What should we call it? Ichigo asked, a wild grin on his face. Who cares? Just throw it, Naruto roared. Together, they hurled the fused technique. It tore through the air, warping reality around it, a screaming ball of hybridized power that represented the hope of two worlds. The leader's eyes, hidden behind the black mask, widened for the first time. He brought his sword up, pouring all of his own considerable power into a defensive stance. The attack struck. The explosion was not a sound. It was an absence. A wave of pure, silent annihilation that expanded outwards. The very color drained from the world. For a single, terrifying moment, there was only white light. When vision returned, the leader was still standing. His clothes were shredded, his perfect stance was broken, and a massive crack ran down the center of his black porcelain mask. He was breathing heavily, his sword arm trembling. For the first time, he was wounded. But he was smiling, because the axiom of nullity in his other hand was now glowing with the intensity of a newborn star. The energy from their combined attack had been the final catalyst. Thank you, the leader said, his voice laced with a cold, triumphant finality. You have given me exactly what I needed. The crack in his mask split open, and it fell away in 2 pieces, revealing the face beneath. It was the face of a man, ancient and severe, with pale blue eyes that held the cold light of a distant star. He was a Shinigami, and Yamamoto, watching from the rear, let out a choked gasp of recognition. Koryu. It cannot be. The correction is at hand. Koryu, the first Shinigami and architect of the original sin, declared. The axiom of nullity pulsed one final time, and a wave of silent, white, reality unwriting energy began to expand from it, slow and inexorable. The unholy alliance had won the battle. But they had just lost the war. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The God of a New Era. The world ended in silence. It was not the roar of an explosion or the scream of the dying. It was a wave of pure, white, conceptual nothingness, expanding slowly and inexorably from the axiom of nullity in Koryu's hand. Where the white light touched, reality ceased to have been. The rubble of a destroyed building did not turn to dust. It was simply gone, the ground beneath it smooth and untouched, as if it had never been built. The very history of the object was being unwritten. Every warrior on the battlefield, hero and villain alike, was frozen. Not by fear, though there was plenty of that, but by a profound, soul-deep understanding of their own imminent extinction. This was not death. This was erasure. There would be no afterlife, no cycle of reincarnation. There would only be nothing. Aizen's composed smile had vanished, replaced by a thin, hard line of disbelief. His entire life's ambition, his grand, cosmic rebellion, was about to be rendered moot by a footnote from a forgotten age. Ichigo stood panting, Zangetsu feeling impossibly heavy in his hand, the raw power of his fused attack having amounted to nothing more than a trigger for the apocalypse. The captains, battered and drained, could only watch as the silent white tide crept towards them. The wave touched the edge of the square, and the first shinobi, a brave chunin who had been helping the wounded, was caught in its embrace. He didn't scream. He simply faded, becoming translucent for a half-second before vanishing completely. The memory of him already felt thin, dreamlike, to those who had watched. This was it, the ultimate, perfect checkmate. The cold logic of order had won. Naruto stood at the epicenter of the despair. His gaze locked on the approaching wave. He felt Rangiku's hand find his, her fingers lacing through his own, a desperate, final point of contact in a dissolving universe. He looked at her. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear, fixed on him. There was no fear in them anymore. Only a deep, unwavering trust that was more terrifying and more empowering than any threat. You are the proof that order and chaos can coexist. His mother's words echoed in the sudden, profound stillness of his mind. He was the son of Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash, a man of perfect, ordered precision. A master of the logical art of space-time ninjutsu. He was the son of Kushina Uzumaki, a woman of a chaotic, fiercely passionate bloodline, a descendant of Shinigami who had championed freedom over control. He was the vessel of Kurama, the living heart of a primordial god of chaos. And he was Naruto Uzumaki, a boy who had built a world of connections, of messy, unpredictable, beautiful bonds. Out of a childhood of perfect, ordered isolation. He was all of them. Order, chaos, and the human heart that bound them together. He finally understood. He had been fighting with pieces of himself, his sage mode, his Shinigami power, Kurama's chakra, but never with the whole. Koryu's power was absolute because it was born of a single, unified ideology. To defeat him, Naruto had to become just as unified. He closed his eyes and let go. He let go of the rage, of the desperation. He stopped fighting the wave. Instead, he reached inward and embraced all the warring parts of his soul. He calmed the cold logic of the fourth Hokage's seals, the fiery passion of his Uzumaki blood, the roaring, untamed chaos of Kurama, and the simple, unwavering love he felt for the woman holding his hand. He didn't try to balance them. He let them merge. The world outside of him was being erased. The world inside of him was being born. A new power bloomed in his chest. It was not crimson. It was not golden. It was a light he had no name for, a color the universe had not yet seen. It erupted from him, not as a wave, but as a presence. A truth. The silent, white wave of the axiom of nullity touched him. And it stopped. The wave of absolute erasure hit the field of Naruto's new power and froze in place, held in a perfect, shimmering sphere around the center of the village. Inside the bubble, time and space seemed to warp. The sounds of battle, the cries of the wounded, all of it faded into a distant echo. The world outside the sphere became a blur of muted color. Only two beings remained in sharp focus. Standing on the precipice of oblivion, Naruto and Koryu. Koryu stared, his ancient, severe face finally showing an emotion, pure, unadulterated shock. "What is this?" he breathed. "The axiom is absolute. It cannot be resisted. It can only erase." Naruto opened his eyes. They were no longer blue. They were iridescent, shimmering with the light of his newfound power, containing the wisdom of a sage, the fire of a demon, and the depth of a human soul. The tomo markings on his back returned, no longer etched in one color, but swirling with a liquid, rainbow light. A simple, black jacket, not unlike his father's, formed over his upper body, its back emblazoned with the Uzumaki spiral, which now pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence. "You're wrong," Naruto said, his voice a perfect synthesis of all he was: calm, passionate, ancient, and young. "Anything can be resisted. That's the entire point." He let go of Rangiku's hand, took a single step forward, and the bubble of contested reality moved with him. The rest of his allies left safely behind the frozen wall of white light. He and Koryu were alone now, in a pocket dimension of their own making, the final argument at the end of the universe. "Your existence is a paradox that will tear the worlds asunder," Koryu stated, raising his blade, his composure returning, replaced by a zealous fire. "I have seen it 1,000 times. Power like yours breeds ambition, breeds war, breeds suffering. I offer a perfect, silent peace. An end to the endless, painful cycle. Why do you resist salvation?" "You call a cage salvation," Naruto countered. Not raising a weapon, he simply walked towards his opponent. "You look at Aizen, at all the conflicts of history, and you see proof that power corrupts. I look at my friends, at people who fought and bled for each other today, shinobi and shinigami, rivals and even traitors, and I see proof that connection saves. That's the difference between us. You see the world as a problem to be solved. I see it as a family to be protected." An idealistic sentiment, Koryu sneered, and he lunged, his blade a flash of perfect, orderly death. "Let me show you the flaw in your logic." He battle that followed was not a clash of steel. It was a clash of philosophies. Koryu attacked with the absolute, killing logic of his art. Naruto met him not with force, but with understanding. When Koryu's blade swept in, Naruto's hand would rise to meet it, his fingers glowing with the new light. The blade would stop inches from his skin, its killing intent dissolved, its perfect physics unwr. Hidden by a power that operated on a higher principle. When Koryu used his dispel technique, Naruto simply held up his palm, and the nullifying energy would be absorbed into him, the order of it embraced by the chaos within him, and turned into something new. He was not blocking. He was not nullifying. He was harmonizing. "You cannot win," Naruto said calmly, catching Koryu's wrist in a gentle but unbreakable grip. "Your power is based on a single, rigid idea of how the universe should be. My power is based on accepting the universe for what it is. It can bend, it can adapt, it can grow. Yours can only break." Koryu roared in frustration, a raw, passionate sound that was utterly at odds with his own philosophy. He poured all his power into one final, desperate attack, his body glowing with the white light of his absolute order. He became a living spear of correction, aimed at the heart of the great anomaly. Naruto didn't move to stop him. He opened his arms in a gesture of acceptance. The spear of white light struck him in the chest. And it was absorbed. All of it. For a moment, Naruto's body shone with a light so bright it was blinding. Then, it settled. Koryu stood before him, disarmed and powerless. His final attack consumed. He stared in abject defeat. "Now," Naruto said softly, "you get to see what real order looks like." He placed his hand on Koryu's forehead. The swirling G-spiral of the Uzumaki clan glowed on his palm. It was not a destructive technique. It was the ultimate fuinjutsu. He was not destroying his enemy. He was writing a new law. "I sentence you not to death, but to understanding," Naruto declared. "You crave a world of perfect, silent order. Then you shall have it." Koryu's eyes widened in horror as he felt his own soul being rewritten. He was not being imprisoned in a dungeon or a seal. He was being imprisoned inside his own perfect world. A pocket dimension of infinite, silent, white space. A universe with no chaos, no change, no life, no connection. A perfect, orderly cage where he would be forced to confront the profound, soul-crushing emptiness of his own victory for all eternity. His body dissolved, not into nothingness, but into particle. Less of light that were drawn into the seal on Naruto's palm. The axiom of nullity, its master gone, crumbled into inert, white dust. The battle was over. The shimmering sphere of contested reality collapsed. The white wave of erasure vanished. The world snapped back into focus. Naruto stood alone in the center of the square, the strange, iridescent light slowly receding from his form. He turned, his eyes finding the unconscious form of Kakashi. He walked over, kneeling beside his sensei. He placed a hand over the wound, and a soft, warm light enveloped Kakashi's body. The slow, entropic decay of his soul was not just halted. It was reversed. The unwriting was rewritten. Kakashi's breathing deepened, becoming steady and strong again. Naruto stood up, looking at the stunned faces of his allies. Aizen was the first to speak, his voice lacking its usual condescension, replaced by something that sounded unnervingly like respect. "It seems I have grossly underestimated the scale of this game," he said. He looked at Naruto not as a specimen, but as a rival power on the cosmic board. "You are not a king, Naruto Uzumaki. You are the board itself." Without another word, he turned, a slit of darkness opening behind him. "This has been illuminating. I will see you again." He stepped through and was gone. The immediate crisis was over. The silence that followed was broken by a single, relieved sob. Rangiku rushed to him, her arms wrapping around him in a fierce, desperate embrace. He hugged her back, burying his face in her hair, the last vestiges of his divine power fading away, leaving only the man behind. He felt her tears on his neck, and he held her tighter. "You're an idiot," she whispered into his shoulder, her voice thick with emotion. "Yeah," he whispered back. "But I'm your idiot." Weeks later, the work of rebuilding had begun. An official, if tentative, alliance had been forged between Konoha and the Soul Society, born of a shared, world-ending crisis. Shinigami healers worked alongside medical nin, sharing knowledge and techniques. Kido experts helped Konoha's barrier core reinforce the village's defenses. It was the beginning of a new era. Naruto stood atop the Hokage monument, looking out over his village. The scars were still visible, but so were the signs of life, of resilience. The sounds of hammers and the shouts of children filled the air. It was the beautiful, chaotic music of his world. "Penny for your thoughts," a familiar, sultry voice asked. Rangiku came to stand beside him, a bottle of sake in one hand, 2 cups in the other. She wore a simple yukata, having traded her shihakusho for something more comfortable during her extended, diplomatic mission. She poured them both a drink. "Just thinking," he said, accepting the cup, "about how complicated everything's gotten." "You say that like it's a bad thing," she teased, leaning against the stone railing. "I think complicated suits you." He smiled, a genuine, easy smile. He looked at her, at the way the setting sun caught the orange highlights in her hair, at the easy grace in her posture. The loneliness that had been his lifelong companion was gone. It had been replaced by a RMTH that had nothing to do with Kurama or Sage Mode. "I have to be the bridge between our worlds now, apparently," he said, a hint of mock weariness in his tone. "Lots of meetings, lots of paperwork, way more than being Hokage." "Well, a bridge needs an anchor," she replied, her voice soft. She moved closer, her shoulder pressing against his. "Someone to make sure it doesn't get washed away in the storm." He turned to face her, taking her free hand in his. Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze was the weight of all they had been through, the spars, the shared stories, the terror, the desperate confession, the silent promise. No more words were needed. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a gentle, searching kiss, filled with all the relief and hope and quiet, profound love that had bloomed between them in the heart of the fire. It was the taste of sake and orange blossoms, of ash and new beginnings. When they parted, they simply stood there, their hands intertwined, foreheads resting against each other as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. His journey was far from over. The worlds were larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. But for the first time in his life, as he stood beside the woman who had seen every part of his soul and loved him anyway, Naruto Uzumaki felt truly, completely home. Chapter 10 End.